that the building was in urgent need of repair. The president of the Condominium Association explained in a letter that damage detected during an inspection in 2018 had become significantly worse. The association asked residents to pay for extensive repair work to fix structural problems. Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez is holding talks at his official residence in Madrid with the pro-independence head of Catalonia's regional government, Pere Aragonès. It comes a week after the Spanish government conditionally pardoned 9 jailed Catalan separatists. The initial meeting is meant to explore how negotiations might be held to try to resolve the political crisis over Catalan independence. Spain's cabinet has approved draft legislation to allow people aged 16 and over to freely determine their own gender. Children aged 14 and 15 could also do this, but with parental approval. Here's Danny Eberhard.
Spain's centre-left government aims, in its words, to depathologise the issue of gender. If approved by Parliament, it would mean transgender people could change their name and listed sex in the civil registry without having to obtain a medical diagnosis or undergo unwanted hormone treatment. As the Equalities Minister Irene Montero put it, people would no longer have to be seen as ill to have their chosen gender recognised. The legislation would also confirm many other rights for LGBT people and reinforce school education on sexual minorities and gender issues.
2 fierce footballing rivals, England and Germany, are playing in one of the most eagerly awaited matches of the European Championships. The winner will seal one of the last spots for the quarter-finals. At half-time, the score was 0-0. BBC News.
Hi, I'm Emily Webb and welcome to Outlook. It's the show where we take you on a tour of the world through the lives of extraordinary people. Today we're travelling from Trinidad to England, Northern Ireland, South Africa and Iraq, all through one man. If you're from the UK and you just had a television in the 1990s, you'll probably recognise his voice.
ITN News at 10 with Trevor McDonald.
Molam's winning gamble, loyalist prisoners back the talks.
Sir Trevor McDonald. He spent years as the main presenter of ITV's News at 10, making him a household name for many. But he's also the country's first black television reporter. He started in radio, even working for the BBC World Service.
From London, it's Trevor McDonald with Africa's Sunday People.
Hello, and it's nice to be with you again.
From there, he went to the television production company ITN and travelled the world as a reporter. He interviewed the former Iraqi president Saddam Hussein.
How can you justify the atrocities committed by Iraqi troops in Kuwait in your name?
Have you seen these atrocities yourself?
And even secured one of the first interviews with Nelson Mandela after his release.
Arriving in South Africa to report on this momentous event, you could sense the feeling that change was in the air.
We are ready for honourable compromises without surrendering our principles.
But Sir Trevor's story began in Trinidad, where he lived with his family in a rented home. And even as a child, his dad had high hopes for Trevor's future.
He was a lovely man. What I remember about him was the great interest he took in my life, and in a way sort of steered me through those early turbulent years of childhood and growing up. And he did it with sort of in a very interesting way. He was never a very voluble man. He didn't talk very much, and viewed many situations with a kind of quiet equanimity. But yet he managed to be influential. And I was not terribly conscious of looking up to him, but I did in that quiet way. For example, he insisted that I read everything, and he hated my reading comics. He thought there were better books than comic books to be read. So one of the consequences of that was when he did odd jobs for a Scottish doctor, he brought me home discarded copies of The Lancet, the medical magazine. And I for a long time, I thought, I'm supposed to read this stuff. And I became very interested in the Lancet. But no, he always exerted a quiet influence. He told me what he felt about things. Those about which he had very few views, he would be very quiet on. But I got the message. I know he didn't approve terribly. And we had a very good relationship.
You mention odd jobs. What did he do? What sort of jobs?
Well, my father was a refinery engineer at Texaco, but he had a market garden. We kept pigs. He mended shoes at one stage for people. We were a family of 4 children, and on his Texaco salary, things weren't economically viable, to put it mildly. And so he felt he had to do all these things to survive. My mother was terribly good at managing the house, but even so, all these other jobs were necessary if we were to make ends meet. One of the other things I remembered was that it was always possible to get goods and food on tick from nearby stores. So you would go there Monday to Thursday and say, I'll pay you on Friday. And that was permitted. And we survived by that.
Where were you living as a family?
We were living in a little village in southern Trinidad called St. Margaret's. It was a very small village with a few shops, but I don't believe there could be more than 700 or 800 people. And we all knew each other. And there was a real sense of community. I was told and scolded if I didn't say hello to everybody as I passed by on the street. If you didn't, my father would say, Mr. Jones told me you walked by this morning but didn't acknowledge him. And you would be counseled about that. So that it was intensely community-minded. People looked after each other. That was the sense of the community. And that made life much, much, much more easy. I remember my father knew some taxi drivers, and on some mornings, walking to school, when it rained, they would stop and give me a ride. And they said, because you were Mr. MacDonald's son. And those were very cherished memories.
It was your dad who bought the family their first radio, which is how you first started to think about becoming a journalist. What would you listen to?
The World Service of the BBC.
Every hour of the day, the voice of London goes round the world. Broadcasting carries it to millions of people in many lands.
Here is the news read by Derek Baker. The American Secretary of State, Mr. Dulles, has said in Paris...
You said he bought the first radio. I pummeled him into buying the first radio. My interest was cricket.
High into the outfield, 4 runs. No, it won't get to the fence. They're going for the 3, though. Trout slides his bat behind the line, he's flying for it, and he's out!
And at one stage, when the Australians played the West Indies, the time difference meant that I was out very late. There was somebody in the village who had a radio, and I would go around there and come home a little too late for his liking. So in the end, he succumbed and got us this radio. It was a huge thing with a huge battery, but it did the trick. And from the sport and the love of sport, I kind of graduated to listening to the World Service and the World News. And that gave me my first intimation that this might be something I might like to do.
What about it captured your imagination?
I think it was fairly basic, really. I listened to those people traveling the world, which sounded a great, great adventure. I was quite aware that they were reporting on things of great political importance. They would be accorded front seats to see these great events, Middle East peace talks or Russian summit meetings. And they had the chance to talk to all these important people, presidents and prime ministers and senior diplomats. I thought this sounded really great. And I must also confess that it did also occur to me that this was a way of getting out of my small island, which was fairly constricting, and this was a way of seeing a greater part of the world.
And you then started up a radio station at school.
I've forgotten that. I think we had double math or something on Friday afternoons. We had a school system which had, speakers in every classroom. And on Friday afternoons, I convinced the headmaster that I could do a bulletin of world news on Friday afternoons. So I escaped the double math, which I wasn't very good at, and got the chance to read out some world news. it was copied absolutely from the BBC. So I listened to the BBC and repeated almost verbatim what they said, and went round throughout the school. It achieved quite a kind of fame because I met people from other schools who said, I hear you're doing this radio network in your school on Friday afternoons. What a good idea.
A school celebrity.
Yeah, I became a school celebrity.
So you did then graduate from school celebrity with your radio station there, and you went to Radio Trinidad. And on your first day of work, your dad went there with you.
My father took me to Port of Spain, and he took me to my first day at work. I remembered, too, that he took me to my first day at school and came to meet me at the end of that rather long, agonizing day. And that was the kind of image that I have of his caring and of the way he was very concerned about what I did, and I've never really forgotten that.
Do you think he instilled in you the sense that you could do anything you wanted to?
He did. It was a strange concept for us because we were not particularly well off, and there weren't too many examples of people who had excelled in any kind of field, but my father always found them and pointed them out to us. And he did, as you say, tell us that if you really want to do something, you can do it. And he went even further by suggesting that you shouldn't ever fall for the advice that there is something that you can't achieve. If you really want to do something sufficiently well, and if you strove hard enough to do it, then it was possible. And I always felt that, and so I was not always conscious of it being the advice of my father, but somewhere at the back of my head I always thought, why not try this? And I'm much later at ITN, I was a general reporter, and then I wanted to do diplomatic reporting, to be able to travel around the world and do big conferences and so on. And I remember somebody saying to me in the bar at ITN one night, you know, maybe you and I have got just about as far as we could go, and this might be it. And I went downstairs to my desk and I thought, this is not it. So that in a strange way, in a way in which I didn't think about it, that advice from my father, you know, really worked out for me.
And what you wanted to do at the time was to work for the BBC World Service. And through your job at Radio Trinidad, you had a lot of contact with the World Service.
Yeah, we had a lot of contact because Radio Trinidad was not particularly well financed. And so we took a lot of BBC World Service output. And so there would be the news on Radio Trinidad. But when a big event happened, for example, I remember particularly well when John Kennedy was shot.
President Kennedy and Governor John Colony of Texas were shot today from an ambush.
I was on duty that day, and we went on for some minutes about John Kennedy, and then we thought, okay, we know how we're going to continue this. We'll switch to the World Service of the BBC, who will be covering this with many more correspondents from many more points of view, and that's what we did. Because of that connection, people from London often came out to see their customers around the Caribbean, and they came to Trinidad, and I saw them, I met them, I became on friendly terms with some of them, and bored them rigidly about my desire to come to work in London.
And that did one day pay off.
Somebody called me up and said, there's a job going for a producer in the overseas regional service of the BBC at Bush House in the Aldwych in London. Would you like to come? And I said, would I like to come? and you know, that was a stroke of immense good fortune. Few people get a chance to be asked to come to London and to a job. That's what happened to me. I was terribly lucky.
Do you remember the feeling that you had when they told you that?
I had a great feeling. Bush House was a wonderful place. Its internationalism was the first thing that struck me. You were walking into a United Nations of broadcasting, and I enjoy that. immediately enjoyed the fact that you could talk to people from India and people from China and people from Russia and people from all parts of southern Africa. And I really, really loved that atmosphere. And at the end of the day, we all met at the bar and had a drink, and it was a very, very congenial place.
Is it true that your dad used to ring up from Trinidad and ask other people how you were doing?
My father always asked other people how I was doing. He started this, in fact, when I was at school. He would ambush passing teachers and say to them, ask them how I was doing. And anything less than a fulsome commendation would mean I was condemned to extra lessons. He was always, always interested in what I did. And I suppose at base it was the fact that he didn't have the chance to have the education that I was being given and wanted to make sure that that was available to his children. I was not a very good communicator about myself and about how I was doing. And so my father felt it necessary to get some other evidence, and this is what he did. But it was also a demonstration of his interest in my career, of which eventually he became terribly proud.
So you were working as a producer, which is basically when you're making the programs, but you're not reporting all the time, which is what you wanted to do.
Yes, I got into trouble about that.
Oh, really? What happened?
Well, because I was, as a producer, you're instructed to set up interviews. And I said to my head of department one day, I could actually go out and do these interviews myself.
Earlier this year, Soyinka became editor of the magazine Transition, which was founded in the early 1960s.
And so after a time, I became more involved in doing my own interviews.
Is there any one thing which you feel determines your career more than anything else?
I think it's really determination is really...
And the resistance from the hierarchy stopped at some point, and I was able to do what I wanted to do in being more active than being a sort of passive producer.
From London, it's Trevor MacDonald with Africa's Sunday People.
Hello again from London. I feel that we should be apologising to those of our listeners who aren't sports fans, or more correctly, as some of us here are, sports fanatics.
You then turned your attention to television. There was a potential opportunity at the BBC to work in television, but you felt that they might be giving it to you for the wrong reasons?
I was asked by the BBC once, and they were... This was probably very genuinely meant, and I was, nicely entertained and talked to about a job in television. And then the conversation turned to the fact that the BBC had been under pressure from the Race Relations Board to have more black reporters. I had absolutely no problem about that. As a receiver of public money, the BBC had a right to be conscious of the diversity of the community. Personally, very, very personally, I didn't want to be seen as a token black reporter. This was me. It wasn't for me, though. I wanted to be seen on my own merit. I felt there were some things I could do, and I wanted to be judged on that and on that alone.
So instead, you decided that you take up this job at ITN, which is this rival news network, basically. And when you accepted that job, did you realise that you would be the first black reporter?
I quickly realized it. It was a bit of a shock to me. The day after it was announced, somebody came around to Bush House and from the newspapers and wanted to take my picture. And I said to my colleagues, I said, there's a guy outside who wants to take my picture. Could you explain to me why and what's this about? And he said, you idiot, you don't realize that you have crossed this barrier. But the interesting point for me was that I kind of made it clear to people at ITN that I was not going to be a reporter relegated to the second division of the reporting team. I didn't want to do immigrant stories in Bradford or in Brixton, not in any way demeaning the importance of those stories, but I wanted to do what everybody else was doing, and I wanted to be seen to be on an equal footing. That resulted in my being sent, because that was the big story at the time, to Northern Ireland. And I always remember meeting some West Indian friends some months later after I'd started going to Northern Ireland. And they said to me, my goodness, these ITN people are very strange. Here they are, having hired the first black reporter, and they immediately sent him out to Northern Ireland to get killed. I said, no, you don't quite understand. I asked to be part of that. I wanted to be seen to be doing what everybody else did.
So Northern Ireland, so at the time you were sent there, there was a lot of sectarian violence between the Protestant community and the Catholic community happening. You did have all of these dreams of being a reporter, going to these different places, but when you got there, it must have been a very scary situation to be in.
It was forever scary, I scare very easily. I found the violence terribly difficult to understand. I found the hatred, the open hatred, something I'd never seen before.
The Northern Ireland politician, Mr. Paddy Devlin, has been forced to leave his Belfast home. In Northern Ireland, thousands of loyalists turned out for the funeral of John McMichael, who was killed by an IRA bomb.
I'd never heard a bomb go off before I went to Northern Ireland. I'd never seen such weapons, submachine guns. And I'd never seen people thinking that they were making a political point by blowing up buildings and causing devastation to city streets. I'd never seen anything like it.
Meanwhile, a 17-year-old has been charged with murdering a policeman who was shot and killed.
I'd never seen people killed in such a way. This was all very, very, very shocking to me. But it was a great, great learning experience. When I look back at my time there, I think it did in a way, in a curious way, prepare me for, covering stories later in the Middle East and in Southeast Asia and in Southern Africa. The other point in terms of my television career is that I was a black reporter in the ghettos of Andersonstown and the Falls Road, and I was reporting on television. It was the main news item most nights, and it got me noticed. If I may be immodest for a bit about this, it did no harm to my television career, because in television you need to get yourself noticed, you need to be seen.
It is quite an odd thing about journalism, isn't it, that when these terrible things are happening to people in other places, that can also be the making of somebody's career.
It's very, very strange. And it became stranger as I went on in the television world. It got to the point where I found that people were a little too excited about the possibility of danger. Whenever there was news about a war, there was a general amount of excitement in the newsroom. I hated all that. I hated the thought of war. I hated the actual scenes of war. I hated the devastation it caused. I remember particularly just before the Iraq war, there was a summit meeting in Geneva with the Iraqis and with the Americans. And I remember so well, I was in Saudi Arabia the day the talks collapsed. And I felt terribly, terribly sad. I left my colleagues and sort of wandered off on this airbase where we were. I must say that some of my other colleagues began actively preparing for covering this war. I couldn't get my mind around the first bit of it, which was these talks had collapsed. There was an inevitability about what would happen next. There was going to be killing, and people will die in their hundreds of thousands. And I always found that a terrible, terrible tragedy.
When you would have those feelings, why did you still think it was important to go to those places?
The basic answer about that is it was part of the job. This is what television reporters did. That is what I wanted to do. It's the life I chose, and so I went. What is even more, and I use the word sparingly, but what is even more appalling is that you kind of jumped and went when you were summoned to do so. I also felt, and this is where the reporting gene kicks in, I suppose, I also felt it was important to try to explain to people what was going on. I also hoped that by showing scenes of the devastation and showing what war actually did to societies and to communities and to countries, to systems of governance where they existed, I always hoped that by demonstrating that, you could probably educate people about what was happening. Even then, we were conscious of the fact that we were living in a globalized world. We were not unaffected by what happened in India or Pakistan or in America. And it was important to try and go to these places to explain to people as much as you could what was going on. I felt it was part of my philosophy, really, as a journalist, trying to explain the unexplainable. Why was this happening? What were people thinking about it? What's it doing to their lives? How would their lives change? How is it all going to end?
Outlook will be back after a short break as we revisit Sir Trevor MacDonald's interviews with Nelson Mandela, Saddam Hussein, and an on-air dance with Desmond Tutu.
This is the BBC World Service, and for the next World Book Club, Harriet Gilbert is talking to author Jane Harper about her novel The Dry.
It's a chilling story set under a sweltering sun.
It wasn't as though the farm hadn't seen death before, and the blowflies didn't discriminate. To them, there was little difference between a carcass and a corpse.
And to date, bought by more than 1 million readers around the world.
The droughts had left the flies spoiled for choice that summer.
The book opens with a devastating triple killing that confronts the detective investigating it with secrets and violence from his own past.
I was a little bit weary of detectives who were so flawed. As a reader, I sometimes wonder how they managed to get themselves out of bed and dressed and fed. I kind of wanted someone who was believable that he could actually hold down the job that he has.
Harriet Gilbert talks to Jane Harper. World Book Club, Saturday at 11 GMT.
We're staying with Sir Trevor MacDonald in part 2 of Outlook as he remembers being sent to interview the Iraqi president Saddam Hussein.
On our arrival, the telephone lines were cut. Here I was at a presidential palace. My office has no idea where I am. So we were entirely cut off from any kind of contact with the rest of the country. And I thought that was odd, and it was really worrying for me that night.
Face to face with a dictator after the news.
BBC News. Rebels in Ethiopia's northern Tigray region say they'll enter the country's Amhara region and neighbouring Eritrea to pursue what they describe as enemy forces. The spokesman for the Tigray People's Liberation Front said the main aim was to degrade the capabilities of those who've been fighting the Tigrayans for the past 8 months. It's emerged that residents at the Florida apartment block that collapsed last week were warned in April that the building needed repair. The head of the condominium association said damage detected during an inspection in 2018 had become significantly worse. Scientists have discovered an ancient strain of plague bacteria in human remains buried about 5,000 years ago in Latvia. Researchers found it was probably less contagious and not as deadly as the version which became known as the Black Death. Nigeria's Justice Minister says a prominent separatist leader has been arrested and brought before the High Court. Nnamdi Kanu, the head of the indigenous people of Biafra group, has been on the run for more than 2 years. Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez is holding talks with the separatist president of the Catalonia region, Pere Aragonès. It comes a week after the Spanish government pardoned 9 jailed Catalan separatists. Portuguese police have detained the prominent art collector João Berardo as part of an investigation into suspected money laundering and fraud. Officers are looking into more than $500 million worth of loans granted by the state-owned bank, Caixa Geral, to a group of companies led by Mr. Berardo. In football's European Championship, England and Germany are vying for one of the last 2 spots for the quarter-finals. More than 40,000 spectators are watching at London's Wembley Stadium. A few minutes ago, the score was 0-0. BBC News.
Hello, you're with Outlook from the BBC World Service. I'm Emily Webb. Today I'm talking to a big name in British broadcasting, Sir Trevor MacDonald. He was knighted in 1999 by the Queen for his services to broadcasting and journalism and presented one of the country's main news programmes for years. Sir Trevor decided he wanted to be a journalist when he was growing up in Trinidad. He'd listen to the family's radio in the small village where they lived and think, I want to go to those places they're speaking about. And by 1990, he was. As an international television reporter for ITN, he secured an interview with the Iraqi president Saddam Hussein, who just invaded Kuwait. He went to Iraq and knew he'd have to ask some challenging questions to a man notorious for his brutality.
Saddam Hussein inspired fear in not only common people in his country, But even in those who worked closely for him, they were terrified at the mere mention of his name. I remember the Iraqis are the nicest people in the world, and you would talk to them and they loved conversing with you about their country and about their lives until you mentioned the words Saddam Hussein. And then they would freeze and say nothing. I remember being slightly annoyed after having several meetings at the Ministry of Information, suddenly being told one day, okay, go to your hotel room and don't leave, and you'll get a call about when you'll be taken away for this interview. That is exactly what we did, and we were called and taken off in a car, and I tried my best to find out where we were heading to, and were told nothing. And then I discovered that the driver of this car, who was accompanied by a major, he had no idea where we were going either, and we would come to these roundabouts, and the major would wait till the last moment as the driver slowed down nervously, and he would tap the dashboard and said, second on the right, second exit on the right. We were taken to a presidential guest house where, on our arrival, the telephone lines were cut. And I remember thinking, here I was at a presidential palace. My office has no idea where I am. And these were the days before mobile phones. So we were entirely cut off from any kind of contact with the rest of the country. And I thought that was odd, and it was really worrying for me that night.
You then went into the interview and you were going to have to put some quite difficult questions to him because he has this notorious reputation.
How can you justify the atrocities committed by Iraqi troops in Kuwait in your name?
Have you seen these atrocities yourself, or any of them?
I have not seen these, but may I quote you some of reports, Mr. President?
When you knew you were going to have to ask those questions, did you feel scared at all?
I was not terribly happy, but I felt it was something I had to do. Saddam Hussein had not only invaded Kuwait and terrorized his fellow countrymen. At that time, if you remember, he was holding some young British children as hostages. So I think that gave me the right to almost sort of demand, what are you doing?
Can I move the discussion on to another subject, Mr. President? Does it worry you that the term Iraqi guest has now come to mean detaining people or detaining a person against his will?
It is certain that the kind of hospitality that we are extending would be difficult to understand.
This was a man whose politics were to some extent very kind of impenetrable to understand, and I felt I had to be pretty tough in the interview.
You were never tempted to shy away from those difficult questions because of the situation that you were in?
I was a little worried about it, but you know, by that time you have lost all of that and you become thoroughly immersed in the moment and in the situation. You are fearful before you go in, and you are fearful a little bit after, wondering what the thoughts about what you did were. But at that moment, you try to do the job.
He did tap you on the shoulder after the interview, though.
It was a moment that I thought maybe I have gone a little too far here, because he said through the interpreter, I'd like to have a word with you. And I was absolutely sure it was going to be, that was a little too rude or something. In fact, he gave me a long lecture about how awful the Kuwaitis were. He even said to me that they had several entrances to their houses where they could have their servants go in. I don't know why he thought that was so extraordinary, considering he lived in a great gilded palace. That for me was a relief that that was all he was worried about.
Particularly because of the time of history in which you were reporting, you did find yourself in some quite complex situations. Like when you went to South Africa, for instance, to report, you were a black reporter and apartheid was still going on. How were you treated? How did you find it when you were there?
You're absolutely right. South Africa was very strange for me. I used to make a joke about it to my colleagues who said, my goodness, you're going to South Africa, you're going to have an interesting time there, meaning it's not going to be particularly pleasant. I joked, I said, well, I should be okay. The majority of the people there are black anyway, so I should be fine. But apartheid had very strict rules about mixing. There were hotels where you could stay. They were called hotels with international licenses. That was the euphemism for a hotel which could take people who weren't white. I remember one particularly odd moment when two members of a conservative party insisted on taking me to lunch, and they stood in the street And they wondered, now, where could we take Trevor? Where is there an international license? After a while, though, it doesn't really matter to me. I was observing the life in a country where this separation by race was its creed. It was the way it lived. Apartheid was absolutely a firm policy. And it discriminated against, and this was its problem, the majority of the population.
How did that feel for you, though? I mean, particularly watching those two politicians have that discussion when you were there.
I found it bizarre. But that was the life. And it occurred to me that apartheid was uncompromising. Even though these were senior white politicians, they had to play by the rules which were set by their white government. You know, this was a very, very tough regime.
Having experienced that and having witnessed that, it must have then been very satisfying when Nelson Mandela was released and you went out there and you were one of the first people to interview him.
It was a glorious moment, and all South Africa felt the same. Soweto and the townships just exploded with joy and singing and dancing as you've never seen.
Arriving in South Africa to report on this momentous event, you could sense the feeling that change was in the air, and you could hear it too.
Weren't you made to dance?
And I watched it. I watched it with great interest. I'm a great observer.
I heard that Desmond Tutu made you dance.
Desmond Tutu finally, at the end of that day when Mandela was released, we anchored News at 10 from Soweto. Mm-hmm. We had a very nice interview, how great it is that Mandela is released. But this journalistic thing about being devil's advocate. And so I said to him near the end of this interview, I said, might it be possible that this man may not be able to accomplish all you hope he will be able to do? And Desmond Tutu said to me, man, this is no time for questions like that. This is time to celebrate. Let's dance.
It's the key to a new South Africa, and it's out, man. It's just glorious.
At which point he put his arms around me as the rain began to fall and did a Desmond Tutu jig. I have always thought that was one of the really, really nice moments of my life.
So you then did interview Mandela himself. How did that interview go?
The interview itself was fine. I thought I asked all the right questions, but they weren't very, very difficult questions. The main one was, how on earth are you going to come to an accommodation with this government which has been so diametrically opposed to everything you stand for? And he surprised us all by his answers, which suggested that if you are prepared to talk seriously, everything is possible. All compromises, will yield results.
We are ready for honorable compromises.
Even on a question like one man, one vote, possible compromise?
Compromises must be made in respect to every issue.
He lived by that. He actually believed that. Even when I look back at it now, I still think it was remarkable. Even more remarkable for me was that you wouldn't be surprised to hear that I did try to get him to talk about how harsh prison life had been. I thought this would make a great headline. Mandela says I was beaten every day, or life was... He said, to every question I asked about that, he said, that's all in the past, he said. And I never got a single word out of him about the harshness of prison life. This guy had been in prison for 27 years and still was so unbitter and unwilling to talk about any hardship. 5 years later, I went back in 1995 and we were doing a television interview with him very early one morning. And he kept asking for the lights to be turned down. And I said to him at one stage, I said, Mr. President, if we turn them down any further, we won't be able to see you or me in these images. And he said, I'm terribly, terribly sorry, but, I can't stand the glare of bright lights because my eyes have been damaged from breaking rocks on Robben Island. And that was the first intimation that I'd ever had about the hardship of prison life. I thought that was extraordinary. I have never met anybody with such character.
When you were there and you witnessed that incredible transformation in South Africa and then getting to interview Mandela, you told me about when you listened to the World Service growing up and how you wanted to be part of that. You wanted to witness those great moments. Did you reflect on that at the end of that day?
I could never have dreamt it. Not in my wildest dreams could I have thought I would end up doing this. This man had become, almost by his long absence from public life, he'd become a mythical figure. And here was I, sitting opposite to him to talk. I could never have dreamt it.
By this stage, you were a household name. I mean, you were a very recognisable face on the television. You were in people's homes every night on the TV screen. There's this wonderful moment where your dad comes to visit you in London and some school children recognise you.
Yes, I was showing him that lovely view of the House of Parliament from across near the Archbishop of Canterbury's house, and you look across on a glorious sunlit day, and it was really an inspiring sight, and I wanted to show my father that. And then this bus stopped, and maybe one of the school children saw me and recognized me. And in the way school children do, the entire bus came out and wanted me to sign their notebooks or their copybooks or whatever it was. Now, I think the interesting thing about his story is I don't think my father had ever seen anybody sign an autograph before, and he didn't know what this was all about. But he decided that it was not a bad thing, and it was probably something which showed that they knew who I was and that I was probably not failing in my job in London as a television reporter. So it was very nice for him. He stood back, he drifted back a few yards away from this scene and had a quiet smile of satisfaction to himself. I don't think we ever talked about it. Mm. He said nothing, but he just smiled, and I would imagine approved.
You were on assignment in Moscow when you found out that your dad had died.
Mm.
Tell me about that day.
I had gone to Moscow to do a series of interviews. I was working then for Channel 4 News, I think. We had arranged a number of interviews with people in the Kremlin. And 2 days later, having set up quite elaborately a lot of interviews, I went to say I was getting the plane out of Moscow that evening. And I explained to the officer in the Kremlin that my father had died and I was going back to London to get across to Trinidad. And I was in a bit of a hurry and kind of suggested that I was literally popping in to say goodbye and to apologize. And he said to me, no, you must sit down and talk about your father. I'd like to hear about his life. I thought that was terribly nice and kind of him to do. He poured me a large glass of vodka and we sat and talked about my father's life. My father would be astonished to think that his name was being mentioned in the Kremlin. I don't know whether my father knew the term the Kremlin or what it meant. It was just a very nice gesture that I remembered very fondly.
How much of your success do you put down to him?
I had the best parents in the world. We had no money, but they gave me a kind of foundation and a set of beliefs in the way I should live my life, by which I have always tried to follow. I don't always manage to live up to their thing, but they were kind, they were, genuine Christian people. At one stage of my life, my mother used to make me take little bits of food around to people who were even worse off than we were. And I would say to my mother, Mom, why do I have to do this? We're not exactly rich. Why do I have to take food around to people because they have more kids than we do? And she would say, just do as you were told. And she had these odd sayings about, always be kind and generous to people. And my mother framed that into a kind of aphorism. She used to say, always be kind and generous to strangers. And so you would make sure that you don't miss the chance of entertaining angels. I have no idea where this thought came from, but it's a very nice one.
Be kind to strangers, lest they be angels in disguise.
Lest they be angels in disguise. She never put it as beautifully as you have just done, but that's what she was saying. It meant that for me that was a great lesson about general kindness to people.
Growing up with so much ambition, I mean, you've just turned 80. Do you think that ambition has been satisfied?
Yes, I never felt particularly ambitious. It's too grand a word, I feel. What I felt is that, A, you had to work hard. Nothing came easily. Nobody gave you anything. And that was very directly part of my upbringing. We were not going to be bequeathed any large sum of money by our parents. So hard work was part of the game. You had to do it. I know Shakespeare has been very unkind about some kind of ambition which he described as, in Julius Caesar's, vaulting ambition which o'erleaps itself and falls on the other side. I don't think mine was ever that. It was a desire not to fail. It was a desire not to be seen as not having made it. And it was a desire to survive in a tough world. And so that is what I did.
Sir Trevor MacDonald. He's recently published a book called An Improbable Life, The Autobiography. You're with Outlook from the BBC World Service. I'm Emily Webb in London, and you are?
This is Rod Marathi, a private investigator in Auckland, New Zealand, listening to Outlook when I'm on surveillance or stuck in traffic.
Hey BBC, my name is OC and I'm from Trinidad and Tobago, and I love to listen to Outlook when I'm making breakfast in the morning.
Hello, it's Sarah Bowie in Buckinghamshire, and I listen to Outlook very quietly when I'm in bed and I have my phone under my pillow.
Do you get out your phone and record yourself telling us where you listen and how you listen? I feel like Rod set the bar quite high, but don't be put off. Then email it to outlook@bbc.com. But for today, from me, Emily Webb, and the whole of the team behind the scenes, thank you very much for joining us.
You're listening to the BBC World Service, and now witness history with me, Zach Brophy. Today, the story of a highly influential place station in Damascus in 1971, following Israel's blistering defeat of the Syrian, Egyptian and Jordanian armies in the Six-Day War.
In the
1960s, theatre was a new thing for us. I was an actor in the National Theatre from the very beginning. It was the golden age of theatre in Syria.
It was on Syria's burgeoning theatre scene that actor Faiza Shawish met the up-and-coming playwright Saadallah Wanus.
I got to know Saadallah through the theatre. He was at the beginning of his career. I loved him. Our relationship was wholesome and fulfilling. Oh, he added so much to my life.
Faiza and Saadallah married and lived together until his death in 1997. In the mid-60s, they were among a young generation infused with hope.
We had such idealistic dreams, not just for Syria, but for the whole Arab world. We wanted a democratic, secular state and an open and free relationship between the individual and the government. We had such enthusiasm for these ideals.
Secular Arab nationalism was on the ascendant. Dreams of a restoration of Arab pride, power and prestige flourished. Tensions and the potential for conflict with Israel intensified. Then, on the 5th of June 1967, rhetoric became reality.
It began quietly enough, a puzzling, muffled boom in the distance, a split-second hesitation in the steady pace of Cairo traffic. Someone said in English, well, this is it. This is war. This is war with Israel.
Israel struck first, and it struck hard. Within 6 days, the Israelis obliterated the armies of Syria, Jordan and Egypt, capturing coveted territories in the process. When the Six-Day War happened and there was this major defeat of the Arab armies, of course, we can think in a sort of geostrategic and the big politics of what it meant, but for yourself, for Saadallah, for your contemporaries, for your generation, what did it mean for you emotionally?
The defeat destroyed us from the inside out. It represented for us a dark obsession, and all of our enthusiasm and dreams and aspirations turned into nightmares and darkness and pessimism.
Sadallah was studying in France at the time.
For Sadallah, the defeat was like a volcano that shook him to his very core.
The war exposed the visions, deceits and decay within many of the Arab nations. Sadallah was at the forefront of those questioning the authorities and their narratives. Openly calling the war a defeat made him a threat.
He wrote the play, and he was influenced by the mental wound the defeat had inflicted on him. After he finished it, he sent it to those of us in the theatre for us to have a look at. We read it as a kind of secret manifesto.
The play was titled A Soirée for the Anniversary of the 5th of June. The name itself a sarcastic swipe at the official government narrative.
The regime at that time started its oppression and refused to admit there had been a defeat. The Arab leaders called it a setback, as a way to try and dress up what was in reality a defeat. The play was forbidden when it was printed. As a text, it was forbidden to enter Syria. Sadallah was not able to bear being away from Syria, so he quit his studies in France and came home. The idea was that we would show the play, but not through the National Theatre or under the auspices of the government. Of course, we faced many problems with censorship.
Sadallah and his new theatrical troupe eventually managed to get the play staged in Damascus in 1971. He drew upon theatrical techniques he had experienced abroad, most notably from the German playwright and poet Bertolt Brecht.
He broke down the barrier between the actors and the audience in a way that viewers took part in what was unfolding on the stage.
The start of the performance was deliberately delayed to build tension. The director, as played by an actor, came on stage to apologise that the show he had commissioned would not be shown after all. A playwright named Abdelghani, again an actor among the crowd, stood up to protest and an argument erupted. Abdelghani shouts, "But don't forget that defeat diminishes the imagination." To which the director replies, "Defeat?" Abdelghani retorts, "Yes, defeat. Does the word shock you? Or perhaps it has a strange ring to it." The director concludes, "To hell with defeat. Who's talking about that?"
You have to remember that it is a play within a play about how the officials dealt with the events of June the 5th. The play was supposed to be a fun party, but this is how the officials thought and dealt with the issues. At first, the audience was not prepared for what was going on. They were surprised to the extent that sometimes there was chaos and misunderstandings, and members of the audience would shout at the actors in the crowd.
The play within the play descended into a farce and ultimately collapsed as actors playing villagers wandered on stage to dispute what actually happened when war broke out and they fled their lands. The play concluded with an official in the front row stopping the production, accusing everyone of sedition and placing the whole audience under arrest before having them all escorted out.
Sadallah was worried at first in breaking down this barrier between the audience and the actors, but in the end he hoped that the play would cause people to rise up from the theatre, go and protest and gather to bring down the regime or denounce the tragedy that had just happened.
Some 25,000 people saw the play in both Damascus and Beirut. It became one of the most influential and famous cultural responses in the Arab world to the Six-Day War. But it did not bring people out into the streets as Sadallah had hoped. Some 50 years later, the Assad family still rules Syria, a country savaged by more than a decade of suppressed revolution and civil war. A very famous quote attributed to Sadallah was, we are sentenced to hope. What did that mean to him? What does it mean to you?
It was very important to him to fight desperation. It was very important to him that hope is our destiny. Hope was our ruler. As for me, I've lost my faith in this sentence. After everything that has happened, after the catastrophe that has befallen Syria, and the revolution that has died a death and been transformed by the regime into a means to kill, oppress, and uproot Syrians. We are sentenced with pain. I don't know if today Sadala would say and mean the sentence in the way he meant it back then.
هلا كان موجود إذا كان بيقولها وبيعنيها مثل ما قالها ولا لا.
Faiza Shawish now lives in London, and she was speaking to me, Zach Brophy, for this edition of Witness History.
You're listening to the BBC World Service, and here's what's happening in the studio this week.
Ada is an artist who can draw her subjects from sight. Not that impressed? What if I tell you that she's a 6-foot-tall humanoid robot making impressionistic sketches? That's more like Ada, and her creator, first AI robot artist, comes to life.
In the studio, today at 21:30 GMT. And in 30 minutes, Sport Today with Lee James.
Tennis greats Roger Federer and Serena Williams, with 15 titles between them, have begun their latest Wimbledon campaigns. Well, at Euro 2020, with Sweden against Ukraine to come.
Stay with us. The newsroom is next on the BBC World Service, the world's radio station.
It's 18 hours GMT.
And there it is! England have beaten Germany by 2-0.
England make history in another chapter of one of football's greatest rivalries. By the way, how's your body coping?
Because football fans can be so emotionally invested in their football team, they have this physiological reaction. We have found spikes in cortisol.
Oh, and that's not a good thing. Hello, I'm Jonathan Savage. Also on the newsroom, Tigrayan rebels claim Ethiopian troops have now fled the region. 15 months in jail for South Africa's former president. His supporters cry foul.
We've seen what President Zuma has done. This is so unfair. President Zuma has been nothing but the best to us as the youth. He has been fighting for the black South Africans.
And the latest weight loss strategy involves a so-called heinous torture device. No, it's not watching football. You're listening to the BBC World Service.
BBC News with Sue Montgomery. Rebels in Ethiopia's northern Tigray region say they'll enter the country's Amhara region and neighbouring Eritrea to pursue what they describe as enemy forces. The spokesman for the Tigray People's Liberation Front, Getachew Reda, said the main aim was to degrade the capabilities of those who've been fighting the Tigrayans for the past 8 months. He said humanitarian agencies would be given full access. But a UNICEF spokesman in Addis Ababa, Victor Chinyama, said it was still not clear whether it was yet safe enough for aid agencies to deploy their teams.
At the moment, the situation on the ground still remains precarious. Our teams are not able to move because we're not too sure who is in charge of the access roads that we need to use. And we hope that in the next couple of days, the situation will be clear enough for us to know who to talk to and who can guarantee safety for our teams.
The United Nations says storms have damaged the shelters of more than 16,000 Ethiopian refugees in eastern Sudan. Heavy rains, strong winds and hailstorms have destroyed tents and swept away belongings. It's emerged that residents at the Florida apartment block that collapsed last week were warned in April that the building was in urgent need of repair. 11 people are known to have died when the building collapsed, but another 150 remain unaccounted for. Sophie Long reports from Miami.
As more than 200 rescue workers continue their round-the-clock operation, painstakingly removing rubble in the hope of finding voids that could contain survivors, it emerged that the president of the Buildings Association explained in a letter on the 9th of April that damage detected 3 years ago had become significantly worse. Families of the victims, frustrated by the agonisingly slow process, are demanding to know how such a catastrophic collapse could have happened. They're being reassured that the rescue operation will continue.
Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez is holding talks in Madrid with the pro-independence head of Catalonia's regional government, Pere Aragonès. Last week, the Spanish government conditionally pardoned 9 jailed Catalan separatists. Portuguese police have detained the prominent businessman and art collector Joe Berardo as part of an investigation into suspected money laundering and fraud. Our correspondent in Lisbon, Alison Roberts, has more details.
The criminal investigation into Joe Berardo, a 76-year-old businessman from Madeira, was triggered 2 years ago when he told a parliamentary committee that he had shifted valuable artworks into a trust so that creditors owed money by companies that he controlled could not seize them. In a statement, police said that the business group under investigation had been lent more than $500 million from Caixa Geral, a state bank, but allegedly breached contracts with it. 2 other banks suffered similar, though smaller, losses. Neither the bank nor Mr. Berardo have commented.
BBC News. The Netherlands has criticised Russia, accusing it of using military jets to aggressively and repeatedly harass one of its navy frigates in the Black Sea. The Dutch Defence Ministry said the armed Russian planes feigned attacks for hours, describing the behaviour as unsafe and totally unjustified. The ministry said it happened on Thursday in international waters off Crimea. Nigeria's Justice Minister says a prominent separatist leader has been arrested and brought before the High Court in Abuja. The head of the indigenous people of Biafra group, Nnamdi Kanu, has been on the run since an arrest warrant was issued more than 2 years ago. The Justice Minister said he'd been repatriated on Sunday. Scientists have discovered an ancient strain of plague bacteria in human remains dating back about 5,000 years. German researchers describe analysing the DNA recovered from the teeth and skull bones of a hunter-gatherer who'd been buried at a site in what is now Latvia. Helen Briggs reports.
Dr. Ben Kraus-Chiora of the Ancient DNA Lab at Germany's University of Kiel says the 20 to 30-year-old hunter-gatherer is the oldest plague victim identified to date. The researchers think this ancient strain of plague was less contagious and not as deadly as its medieval version, challenging the theory that Stone Age populations were hit by large outbreaks of the disease. Plague is still around today, but is easily treatable with antibiotics.
Football, and in the European Championship, England have defeated Germany by 2-0 in one of the tournament's most eagerly awaited matches so far. In the second half, goals from Raheem Sterling and Harry Kane secured England's berth in the quarter-finals. Ukraine take on Sweden shortly in Glasgow to contest the remaining spot in the final 8. BBC News.
Hello, you're listening to the newsroom from the BBC World Service with me, John.
knockout ties that we saw on Monday, with dramatic extra-time victories for both Spain and Switzerland. Perhaps it was inevitable that today's round of last 16 ties, the last two at this stage of the tournament, were going to be a bit more cagey and slightly less on quality in terms of goalmouth action. But when those two goals did come in the final 15 minutes, as you heard, the roof lifted off Wembley. I mean, that was the sound of 40,000 fans. That's less than 50% capacity at Wembley due to coronavirus restrictions. They were only allowed to allow 40,000 fans in. You can imagine what it might sound like when it's at its full 86,000 capacity for the semi-finals and final, by the way, which will be held also back at Wembley. The capacity being raised to 60,000 for those. But yeah, incredible game of football, absolute jubilation for England and despair for Germany. The former world champions, the three-time European champions, are going home at the last 16 stage.
Yeah, and just for our listeners around the world, England v Germany, there's a bit of history there, isn't there?
To put it lightly, Jonathan, as you mentioned, this goes all the way back to the 1966 World Cup final, also held at Wembley 55 years ago, England winning again in extra time in that. And since then, the sides have met 10 times at major tournaments: the 1970 World Cup, the 1990 World Cup, the Euro 96 European Championships. That was 25 years ago this week, also at Wembley Stadium, when the current England manager, Gareth Southgate, as a 25-year-old defender, missed the crucial penalty in that one. So there is so much history between these two sides. You can go back even more recently to the 2010 World Cup in South Africa, where Germany were easy 4-1 winners in the last 16 stage of that tournament. So much history between these two sides. And before today, Germany usually getting the upper hand over England. England had this horrendous record. They'd never beaten Germany in the knockout rounds of a major tournament for 55 years until today. So history rewritten at Wembley.
That's history. What about the future for these two teams?
Well, as you mentioned, England march on now to the quarterfinals. They're into the last 8. They will face either Sweden or Ukraine in Rome on Saturday. Those two about to kick off in about 50 minutes' time in the final last 16 tie. So we'll find out who England will face very shortly. And as for Germany, as you mentioned, well, they're heading home. Could be the end of the road for some of their key players now, the likes of Thomas Muller. He's 33 this year. Will he play another tournament again for Germany? And of course, the manager, Joachim Löw, as you mentioned, has already announced he's leaving after 15 years in the job as German coach.
Mike Williams. Let's then cross to Germany for some reaction. I wonder how fans there have been reacting to this. Jenny Hill is at the Brandenburg Gate in Berlin right now. Jenny, I can hear some noise behind you. Not happy fans, I guess.
No, a lot of very long faces. Actually, I'm at a beer garden in another part of Berlin. First of all, they had to deal with the fact that because of corona restrictions, they couldn't get together with other fans in those huge, great fan zones like we'd often see at the Brandenburg Gate. Instead, they've had to come to smaller venues and, of course, couldn't go many Germans in person to Wembley. And now this. I've just been speaking to fans here, and they are just devastated. One young woman just said, but we always win when we play England. You know, we just didn't expect this. And there's a lot of that. A little earlier on this afternoon, before the match started, as people were gathering, they were telling me we're pretty confident of a win, you know, a really good, solid win at that. And then as the match progressed and there was no goal, and then we saw what happened, they were just despairing here. You know, we're watching these people draped in their black, red and gold flags, clutching their beer glasses, and, you know, in turn, hope and then frustration, hope, frustration, and then ultimately despair. So they're all very upset, but they're all telling me we will be back. Germany will be back.
Jenny Hill in Berlin, thank you. Now, if you're not a football fan, don't worry, we've not forgotten you. We will be addressing that issue before the end of the programme. An advisor to the Tigray People's Liberation Front in Ethiopia has told the BBC all Ethiopian troops have been forced out of the region, which has seen months of fighting, but the claim hasn't been independently verified. Phone and internet communication across Tigray has been down since this morning, a day after government troops withdrew from the regional capital and declared a unilateral ceasefire. Vivian Nunes reports from Nairobi.
When Ethiopia's Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed sent troops to take over the Tigrayan city of Mekelle last November to oust the region's ruling party, he said victory would be swift. But after 8 months of deadly fighting, the Tigrayan People's Liberation Front has taken control of the city, and Ethiopian forces have fled. Mr. Ahmed quickly declared a humanitarian ceasefire in Tigray, but it's clear he no longer has the upper hand in the conflict. Before the TPLF puts down arms, It says it wants to drive out of Tigray all so-called invading enemies, including militia from the region of Amhara and soldiers from the neighbouring Eritrea. Getachew Reda is the TPLF spokesman.
We'll do whatever it takes to see to it that our people remain safe and secure. So if going to Amhara is what it takes, we'll do it. If going to Eritrea is what it takes, we'll do it.
But today, Eritrean troops were reportedly pushed out of the town of Shire, prompting celebrations on the streets. For millions of people in Tigray desperate for food and other supplies, the real question is whether the ceasefire will mean better access for aid agencies. Last month, the UK's Special Envoy on Famine Prevention, Nick Dyer, called the situation in Tigray catastrophic and warned of the risk of famine.
Vivian Nunes. You're listening to the BBC World Service. Sue has the headlines.
England have beaten Germany 2-0, an historic victory that has put them through to the quarter-finals of Euro 2020. Rebels in Ethiopia's northern Tigray region say they'll enter the country's Amhara region and neighbouring Eritrea to pursue what they describe as enemy forces. And the former president of South Africa, Jacob Zuma, has been sentenced to 15 months in jail for contempt of court after refusing to appear at an anti-corruption inquiry.
Yes, how has that sentence imposed on the former president gone down in South Africa? The newsroom's Richard Hamilton is following the story for us, and he's here with me. Richard, talk about the reaction to that.
Yes, Jacob Zuma has always been a divisive figure in South Africa, and he's been compared in some ways to Donald Trump. And in the same way, his supporters will back him no matter what. They'll back him to the hilt, and they refuse to believe that he's done anything wrong, and they think that he's a victim of a kind of political witch hunt or smear campaign. So some of his more prominent supporters include the Veterans Association of the former armed wing of the ANC. They put out a statement published in the Mail and Guardian newspaper in South Africa saying this is utterly unacceptable. We express our outrage and oppose this sentence. And then a friend of Jacob Zuma, Bishop Vusi Dube, who's a politician from KwaZulu-Natal, which is Jacob Zuma's sort of home state, says, "I'm in tears. I've never seen a mismanagement of justice like this. It's not easy for anybody to accept that a man who has done so much for our country will be sent to prison just because he won't sit in on a commission that's presided over by somebody he thought was biased." And he says people are calling to say they're on their way to Nkandla, which is Jacob Zuma's homestead, to protect the former president. So opinions on the streets of South Africa are also very polarised. Here's one resident of Durban, followed by another from Johannesburg.
President Zuma going to jail, I think it's not a good thing. I totally disagree with that. We have people here. We've seen what President Zuma has done during his term of office. This is so unfair. President Zuma has been nothing but the best to us as the youth, and he has been fighting for the black South Africans.
Given the fact that the crimes that he committed, fraud, defrauding the country, it's a generational thing. I mean, you have stolen from the poorest of the poorest, and obviously those poor people take care of the upcoming generation that have to fight the struggle of breaking the curse of poverty and the likes. So the sentence itself does not justify.
Richard, that's a view from the streets. So what are political parties making of it?
Yes, well, the main opposition party, the Democratic Alliance, their leader, John Steenhuisen, said no one was above the law, not even a former president. He said Mr. Zuma, who has steadfastly dodged his day in court for well over a decade, while claiming all the while that his day in court is all that he ever wanted, has finally started to run out of runway. And the Inkatha Freedom Party, which is based in KwaZulu-Natal, said they were well aware of the volatile situation and implore the supporters of the former president to act with restraint and accept the ruling of the Constitutional Court. The Cape Times in South Africa, the newspaper there, they're quoting the United Democratic Movement and their leader, Bantu Holomisa, who said the ruling comes as no surprise as Mr. Zuma showed the Constitutional Court his middle finger. And there's been a more polite response from the governing ANC. their National Executive Committee said they would reflect on the implications and consequences of this judgment. We reaffirm our commitment to upholding the rule of law and the aspirations of democracy.
Richard Hamilton, thank you. Scientists have detected 2 collisions between a neutron star and a black hole in the space of a fortnight. As our science correspondent Palab Ghosh reports, these are cosmological events that could shake the very foundations of what we think we know about the universe.
Black holes are objects with such strong gravity that not even light can escape. Neutron stars are dead stars which are also incredibly dense. Astronomers estimate that a teaspoon of neutron star material would weigh around 4 billion tons. Both objects are cosmological monsters, but black holes are considerably more massive than neutron stars, and current theories in cosmology speculate that they should not be found together very often. The fact that there were 2 collisions of them in the space of 10 days suggests that neutron star-black hole pairs are more common than we thought. This means that the theories about the formation of galaxies, stars and our own solar system may need to be adapted. Dr. Vivian Raymond of Cardiff University is one of the researchers involved, and he's actually thrilled that the new results seem to be at odds with current thinking.
This is fantastic. That means we need to go back to the drawing board, rewrite a little bit of a theory. So this was a bit of a surprise. We've learned a bit of our lesson because whenever we assume something, we tend to be wrong after a while. So we try to keep an open mind and just observe and see what the universe has to tell us.
The collisions were detected by measuring waves caused by the sudden changes in gravitational forces caused by the collision of 2 massive celestial bodies. These are ripples in the fabric of space itself, just like a stone thrown into a still pond. By the time they reach us, the ripples are tiny, less than the width of an atom. The detectors in the US and Italy are among the most sensitive instruments ever constructed. In future, the team hopes to detect neutron star black hole collisions, which are also observed by telescopes in space and on the ground. This will enable scientists to find out more about what neutron stars are made of.
That was Palab Ghosh. Now Sue is back with some other stories from our news desk.
In India, a survey just out shows that while most people believe in religious tolerance, that tolerance doesn't stretch as far as supporting interfaith marriage. The Pew Research Centre interviewed 30,000 people across the country in 17 languages. Here's our global religion correspondent, Lebo Duseku.
From the study, what you can see is many Indians think that the right to practice one's own religion and the right for other people to practice their own religion is a core part of being Indian. And they do want to live together, but separately. They don't want intermixing of communities. Often people didn't see that they had very much in common when it came to religious beliefs. And perhaps that explains some of the attitudes around marriage. Around 80% of Muslims and around 65% of Hindus felt it was really important to stop people marrying outside of their faith.
One of the world's most evasive mammals, the Asiatic golden cat, has been caught on camera in Cambodia for the first time. The sighting has reassured conservationists that the honey-coloured cat, which has a striped face, does still exist in that part of the world. In Britain, a car given to Princess Diana by Prince Charles as an engagement present has been sold at auction for the equivalent of $70,000. Adam Lindsay reports.
Going once at 47,000, twice, the third and final time, sold.
The silver 1981 Ford Escort Mark III Ghia went under the hammer, commanding a considerably higher price than most other 40-year-old cars with 133,000 kilometres on the clock. A silver frog figurine on the bonnet was given to the princess by her sister to evoke the fairy tale of the Frog Prince. The car has been kept in storage for around 2 decades, as the owner wanted to maintain its original condition.
2 gorillas, both born in captivity in zoos in Europe, are thought to have made conservation history by having a baby together in the wild. The pair of western lowland gorillas, a 15-year-old English-born male named Djongo and a 13-year-old female called Mayombe from France, have been living in the Bateke Plateau National Park in Gabon for several years. The new baby is being closely monitored by park rangers, using camera traps in the pair's territory.
Warmest congratulations to the family. It's been called heinous, a torture device, and a return to the Dark Ages. In fact, those are just a few of the mountain of replies to New Zealand's University of Otago's proud Twitter post unveiling its new weight loss device. So what is it, and why the passionate response? I asked our reporter, Adam Lindsay.
In its essence, they're two small metal clamps which get bolted onto the back teeth. Now, they really restrict movement. You can only open your mouth by about 2 millimeters when it's installed, but you can still ingest a liquid diet, and that's what prompts the weight loss. The lead researcher, Professor Paul Brunton of Otago University, described it as a non-invasive, reversible, economical and attractive alternative to invasive surgery. He says that it doesn't restrict breathing or speech, and it can be released in an emergency, but the findings from the study had a slightly different thing to say. They described it only as tolerable. Some of them complained that it was hard to use, some of them said it made it hard to speak, and a lot of them said it made them feel tense. One even said that life in general was less satisfying. One thing that isn't under any type of question, though, is how effective it is. The women who took part in the trial said they lost an average of around 6 kilograms, and that happened in just 2 weeks.
Yeah, not massively surprising, given that you literally can't eat. So it is quite controversial, isn't it?
Yes, and this is obviously the type of thing which is going to prompt a big outrage on social media. Scientists, though, have raised some pretty serious safety concerns. Some people say, what happens if somebody throws up? There are some fears about choking, even people having a heart attack. Often in those situations you need to clear airways. How would that be possible? Also, a number of eating disorder charities have spoken out against it. They've raised concerns about things like it oversimplifying the issue of obesity, and also people who have eating disorders who may be obese but also suffering from severe mental problems. What impact it could have on them to have this device installed. Professor Brunton, again, has responded to these claims. He said that there are no adverse consequences to using the device, and it's only designed for short-term use, 2 or 3 weeks, he says. And that could kickstart better eating habits, enable people to undergo surgery, or even, in some cases where people have diabetes, reverse the onset of that disease.
Adam Lindsay. Now, a reminder of our top story. England have beaten Germany 2-0, an historic victory that's put them through to the quarter-finals of Euro 2020. Now, not everyone hearing our coverage of the football will be jumping up and down. We see you. But why do some of us dislike football and sports in general so much when others can experience such intense physical stress and devotion when watching our team? How much of that is down to our psychology, and how dangerous is that stress for fans? Well, someone who can help answer the questions is Dr. Martha Newson. I spoke to her earlier. She's a cognitive anthropologist from the universities of Kent and Oxford. Dr. Newsom, I'm a football fan. I'm married to a man who's not a football fan, apart from when internationals are on. Then he seems to get behind it for some reason. So this weird situation where some of us get so passionate about a game and some of us it makes us turn the TV off. Is that to do with our psychology?
I'd say very much so, yes. Several levels of psychology. So the first would be our sort of tribal instincts, our group commitment. So your husband, you said, who isn't interested in football unless it's national. Yeah. So he's got one tribal identity going on, which is national, and you've got two. You've got your club, your regional, and you've got your national. So national games get imbued with this sort of extra emotion. It's where you're paraded around on a national stage, which is exciting. So for those outsiders, it could be that they've not experienced it themselves. They've not physically played the game. They don't understand it in a physical sense. It can be a cultural thing. Maybe they just haven't been exposed as a kid. And it could be that they get their tribal loyalties, that feeling of being part of a group, of being supported and contributing to the group. They could get that somewhere else, a gardening club, whatever it is.
It can be so stressful watching football, especially and possibly even if you are one of these fans who only turns up for big internationals tournaments. Is it bad for our health?
Because football fans can be so emotionally invested in their football team, we have found spikes in cortisol, which is a stress hormone. So we measured that in Brazil back in 2014 at the World Cup. I was out there pregnant collecting saliva samples to measure stress hormones. And we found that the most bonded, the most committed football fans had this real peak in stress hormone. And in other studies, I've read about spikes in heart attacks on match day. That's for regional and for club level games. So because the game is so real, it's so important to someone's identity that they have this physiological reaction.
Sometimes the reaction actually becomes very physical. If I'm watching a game, and I've seen managers on the touchline do this too, the ball comes into the penalty area, a player goes up for the header, and I literally head the ball with the player. Why am I doing that?
So I love that you do that, and that's what I watch. When I watch the game, I'm watching the fans. So there's something interesting happening there in your brain, mirror neurons. They fire when we do an action and when we observe an action. So you're watching someone head the ball, and your mirror neuron will fire as if you're doing it yourself. And that happens more so if you have experience of doing it in your past. So if you know all the rules of the game, if you've played football yourself, your mirror neurons are probably going to fire a bit more.
Dr. Martha Newson, and if your cortisol levels have been rising and you'd like to hear all the reaction to England v Germany and the build-up to Sweden v Ukraine, Sport Today is up next on the BBC World Service. Just a reminder, they couldn't beat Scotland though. Thanks for listening.
Coming up next, we're bringing you Sport Today. In half an hour, it's the final part of Guru.
For the last year, we've been investigating claims of sexual and psychological abuse at the heart of one of the biggest yoga organisations in the world. 15 women, one organisation, and countless allegations. Join me, Ishleen Kaur, as I ask who knew what and when.
Then it's Digital Planet. Here's Gareth Mitchell.
There's a new technical standard in town aiming to make your smart light bulb speak to your smart switch and all your other home automation. So will it better connect the things on the Internet of Things?
At 21 GMT, we hear how former criminals are acting as positive mentors to young offenders.
We've never trusted government services, right? We've never trusted them coming into our communities, even when we looked at lawyers who were chosen to represent us.
That's all still to come from the BBC World Service.
Hello, I'm Lee James, and this is Sport Today, live from Wimbledon on the BBC World Service, bringing you the sports stories the world is talking about. The 8-time champion Roger Federer was involved in an almighty battle to avoid a first-round shock exit before his opponent, Adrian Mannarino, was injured and forced to retire in the deciding fifth set. Well, the world number one Ashley Barty is among the Day 2 winners, and England have beaten Germany to reach the quarter-finals of Euro 2020. We have more in 2 minutes.
BBC News. Tigrayan fighters in northern Ethiopia are continuing to gain ground after seizing the regional capital Mekelle on Monday. United Nations officials say the rebels have entered the town of Shire. It was earlier abandoned by Eritrean troops who've been supporting Ethiopian federal forces in the 8-month conflict. A senior American official welcomed Addis Ababa's declaration of a temporary ceasefire, but said the US would not stand by in the face of further horrors in Tigray. The United Nations says storms have damaged the shelters of more than 16,000 Ethiopian refugees in eastern Sudan. Heavy rains, strong winds and hailstorms have destroyed tents and swept away belongings. It's emerged that residents at the Florida apartment block that collapsed last week were warned in April that the building needed repair. The head of the Condominium Association said damage detected during an inspection in 2018 had become significantly worse. Scientists have discovered a strain of plague bacteria in human remains buried about 5,000 years ago in Latvia. Researchers found it was probably less contagious and not as deadly as the version which became known as the Black Death. Nigeria's Justice Minister says a prominent separatist leader has been arrested. Nnamdi Kanu has been on the run for more than 2 years. Portuguese police have detained the prominent art collector João Berardo as part of an investigation into suspected money laundering and fraud. Officers are looking into loans granted by the bank Caixa Geral to a group of companies led by Mr. Berardo. England have gone through to the quarter-finals of football's European Championship with a 2-0 win over Germany. More than 40,000 fans inside Wembley Stadium in London saw the second-half goals from Raheem Sterling and Harry Kane. BBC News.
Terrific rally on match point. Nadal is through.
Big backhand down the line. That is Federer.
That has made me shiver, that shot.
Djokovic, the comeback kid, is Wimbledon champion. It is all over. Cabot is the Wimbledon champion for the very first time.
Live from Wimbledon, this is Sport Today with Lee James.
Well, this is not the way we expected the 8-time champion Roger Federer to go through to the second round. But he has beaten Adrian Mannarino, but we never got to see a fifth set decider. An injury to the Frenchman robbed us of that opportunity. He had played so well in this match, taking a 2-1 lead. But after his retirement, Roger Federer survives an early scare to go through.
Ladies and gentlemen, take your seats.
Some fortune for Federer. Well, the women's world number one, Ashley Barty, overcame the Spaniard Carla Suarez Navarro in 3 sets. It says winning here at Wimbledon on centre court is always a special moment.
Obviously, to play on centre court today, to play my first round on there was awesome. And to be able to play here, you do absolutely anything. You bend over backwards to make sure that you can prepare yourself in a way that you get to experience Wimbledon and play at Wimbledon.
Well, 2 great matches already on centre court. We are live now under the roof, under the lights, with the 7-time champion Serena Williams. She's begun her latest quest for a 24th Grand Slam title. She's meeting the world number 100, Alexandra Sasnovich of Belarus. It was more like she was walking down the aisle than onto centre court when she made her entrance in a white dress train, trailing over the turf behind her. And she is here once again, looking for more success at Wimbledon. Early stages, 2-1 to Serena Williams in the first set, still on serve. Well, over on court number 1 is the men's second seed, Russia's Daniil Medvedev, heading through to the second round. Chris Dennis.
You would have thought so, Lee, yes. He leads Jan-Lennard Struff, the tall German, by 2-1. Medvedev, the number 2 seed, only flew in late on Sunday after winning a grass court event in Mallorca. It's not his favourite service, but he hit the ground running, took the first 2 sets, 6-4, 6-1. Struff, midway through the third set, was interrupted by a call from the crowd who just let him know that England had scored a second goal against his beloved Germany, and that seemed to galvanise him. He took the third set, 6-4, and here we are, 4-all in the fourth.
We will hear from a Wimbledon champion on Sport Today, and we'll hear from Roger Federer after that unfortunate end to his first round match. But as Chris was mentioning there, yes, we did hear a roar or two around the grounds. It happened when Federer was on court. We knew it must be good news for the hosts at Euro 2020. Because while the action was happening here in southwest London, in North London, a crowd of over 40,000 were at Wembley for England against Germany in the last 16 knockout stage. And it's England who came out on top in front of their own fans.
Sterling trying to run infield past Rudiger, plays it through to Kane in the D. Now Kane back to Grealish. Grealish works it to the left-hand side. Shaw's ball across. Sterling's there! England lead! Shaw's taking it on through the middle, and Shaw plays it to Grealish. And Grealish's ball across. It's headed in by Kane! He's joined the party, and England lead 2-0 against the Germans.
And that's how it finished at Wembley. Our football reporter, Mike Williams, was watching the action. This doesn't happen very often, does it, in the knockout stages, Mike?
No, we're getting our history books out, aren't we, Lee? Because England hadn't beaten the Germans in the knockout round of a major tournament before today in 55 years. The 1966 World Cup final was the last time they did it. But that's all history now. They have done it today. How loud did that crowd sound, by the way, in those goal clips? Worth reminding you, that was the noise of 40,000 fans inside Wembley. Less than half the capacity, due to COVID restrictions, of course, for the semis and final at the same stadium at Wembley, that capacity being raised to 60,000. But as you heard, Harry Kane, the England captain, finally getting off the mark at Euro 2020. His first ever goal at a European Championship. Stooping header across the face of goal. That made it 2-0 late on. Before that, Raheem Sterling had opened the scoring on 75 minutes with his third goal in 4 matches for England. He scored 75% of their goals at this tournament.
We knew we needed to put a big performance in against a very good side, and I thought we'd done that today.
Of all the important goals you've scored for England, scoring the opener against Germany must be up there as one of the most special as well.
Yeah, for sure. I said, doing it for your country is always would always be special, and it's definitely a special moment for me.
Talk me through the emotion when it hit the back of the net, because the boys ran over in celebration and you could just see what it meant to the whole team.
Yeah, I celebrated, and then for half a second I thought, let it not be offside. But yeah, I was just really happy it went in, and really happy we got the win.
Worth saying, Lee, that the game wasn't a classic. Certainly wasn't littered with chances or goalmouth action like the last 16 games we saw on Monday, with those dramatic extra-time victories for both Switzerland and Spain. But it was an impressive performance from several key players across the board for England, notably the Manchester United captain Harry Maguire.
We kept hearing things about they're not as good as they used to be, but they're a top team. They'll bounce back, and I'm sure they will, but they have great players, great structure. We've obviously changed our formation to match them up and try to be really aggressive out of the ball and go man for man as much as we can, and I felt like that worked. We didn't give them any rhythm or settle in the game, and yeah, I felt like for a large majority of the game we was in control of the game, and we know that we've got match winners in our team, and it's proven again.
And a quick word on England's defence, Lee. This is the fourth game in a row that they have not conceded a goal. Only the second side in European Championship history not to concede in any of their first 4 games of the tournament, that after Germany in 2016.
So joy for England. They'll face the winners of Sweden-Ukraine, which we'll look ahead to in a moment. That kicks off at Hampden Park in Glasgow. Word on Germany now, though, and Joachim Löw as well, the end for him.
Yeah, the end of the road for Joachim Löw. We already knew he was standing down at the end of this tournament after an incredible 15 years in charge of the national side. He's to be replaced by Hansi Flick. But could we also see the end of some of the older German players, the likes of Thomas Müller, Mats Hummels, Manuel Neuer? Perhaps there'll be one last hurrah. Worth reminding you that the next major tournament, the Qatar World Cup in 2022, just 18 months away. So maybe those players will get one final swan song in a German shirt. But yes, certainly a time of transition for the German national side. They are leaving their second major tournament in a row prematurely after that group stage exit at Russia 2018.
And just a word, Mike, on a manager that we know has left now after Euro 2020 is over.
Yeah, Frank de Boer stood down earlier as the manager of the Netherlands after less than a year in charge. They did top Group C by winning all 3 games, but were beaten 2-0 on Sunday by the Czech Republic in the round of 16. He only took over in September, replacing Ronald Koeman did de Boer, but a statement from both parties earlier said that they will separate with immediate effect.
Mike, thank you. So England through, Sweden, Ukraine to come. Here at Wimbledon then, while that was going on at Wembley, we were watching Roger Federer on centre court. It seemed business as usual when he took the first set, but there were some gasps around this arena when he trailed by 2-1. We'll be looking through to the last time he went out in the first round, way back in 2002, to the 18-year-old qualifier from Croatia, Mario Ancic, on that occasion. Federer was leading 4-2 in the 4th set, and signs he was getting back into things, but the key moment, Adrian Mannarino slipped while trying to change direction behind the baseline and twisted his knee. It really buckled inwards, and I'm afraid there was a grimace, there was pain, the physio came on. He did try and carry on. Federer took the set 6-2, but at the start of the deciding set, it was all over and he was forced to retire. Let's hear from Roger Federer on court afterwards, speaking to the BBC's Richie Persaud about how lucky he felt to get the win.
It shows that one shot can change the outcome of a match, a season, a career. So I wish him all the best, and I hope he recovers quickly so we see him back on the courts, because, look, he could have won the match at the end. Obviously, he was the better player, so I definitely got a bit lucky, but who cares about that? So I wish him all the best.
As always, a very honest appraisal from you. So with that in mind, how pleased are you to end up with the victory today?
I mean, not like this, please, but I don't know, that's how it goes sometimes. You don't get many walkovers throughout a career, and you try also not to have it happen to yourself, and it's a reminder how quickly it goes. But of course, I'm obviously happy I can get another chance for another match here. I worked very hard, and look, at the end, I enjoyed myself out here today. It was great fun until the end, obviously.
Would it be fair to say, though, that in that 4th set, that perhaps things had clicked back into gear and you'd rediscovered a bit of your touch, a bit of your timing and rhythm?
Yeah, I tried to cut down on the length of points a little bit. I thought I found a nice groove from the baseline. He's famous with that shovel backhand. He creates a lot of problems for so many players, and he did the same again today on the grass against me. And so that's why I tried to maybe cut down on the length of points a little bit. It worked well, and then once I got the break, obviously, I was able to maybe loosen up a little bit, but then everything ended. So at the end, it was a very sort of up and down match. Overall, I thought, we were both wrestling, trying to figure out who could enjoy the baseline a little bit more than the other. But, I felt like I had to adjust my game more than he had to, and that was credit to him, of course.
That is Roger Federer then going through. Chris Dennis is with me. Chris, because Federer has made it look so easy for so long, everyone expects him to come out and just put on a masterclass. He hasn't got the games under his belt, though, has he? Would you be worried by that?
Yes, I would actually, Lee. He will feel mightily relieved, and he was very, very sporting in his post-match interview we heard there. But he hasn't played the matches, only his 9th match this year. He didn't play very many, like most people in 2020. He simply hasn't had the match time, and as assiduous as he is in practice, and people say he's one of the hardest working players in practice, it's well known, you simply can't replicate the pressure situations of a match, and he just simply hasn't played enough matches since that double knee surgery last year. That said, he's a class act, and he just needs matches to get himself match by match, round by round into the tournament, and his next challenge will be Richard Gasquet in round 2, and that'll have the purists purring, people like you and I, Lee. Single-handed backhand on both sides of the net.
Well, that is to come then. Will Federer be able to come through that one? It was a real test today. Before him on centre court, the world number 1 Ashley Barty held off a spirited Carla Suarez Navarro to reach the second round. The Australian returning after an injury disrupted her French Open. There was some tension when she was serving for the match in the second set. Navarro eventually taking that on a tie-break, but then Barty closed it out 6-1 in the deciding set. The Spaniard left centre court to the standing ovation, though. Wonderful to see her here after recovering from cancer this year. And Barty paid tribute to her opponent and says she'll be sorely missed on the tour when she retires at the end of this season.
She deserves nothing but the best. And I just said to her it was a pleasure to share the court with you. And, she's an exceptional person, a great fighter, a great competitor, and very well loved and respected in the locker room. And she's going to be sorely missed. And I just wanted to give her the appreciation that she thoroughly deserves. And the crowd was exceptional. They gave her a remarkable reception as well as she's walking off the court. And I kind of didn't know what else to do. I wanted to give her a hug and just say congratulations on an exceptional, remarkable career.
That's Ashley Barty then, who is through to the second round after her victory here on centre court. The 2013 Wimbledon champion Marion Bartoli is with us now. Marion, we'll get onto the game in a moment then and talk about Barty's performance. First of all, though, how good is it to be back here at Wimbledon? That walk through the gates once again, Marion, what was it like for you?
It was amazing, especially now with my daughter. Obviously, this year she's only 6 months old, so she doesn't really realize what's happening. But I can't wait for next year when she will walk and talk, to be able to take her around the ground and show her mommy's name on the champions board. That's going to be a moment I'm so looking forward to.
Very, very special indeed. And it feels like the atmosphere is back once again. It certainly was when Andy Murray was performing late on Monday night. But for the players, it's very different, though, isn't it? They're in this bubble life. They've got at least the crowds back watching them. But Stefanos Tsitsipas spoke yesterday about the challenges of the COVID-19 bubble and said he'd lost some motivation for it after his defeat. It is still a grind, isn't it, for the players on the tour?
It is very much, and especially because at Wimbledon we really had this tradition as players to rent a house either in Wimbledon Village or in Southfields. Probably get a bigger house with you can have all your team with you. You can really enjoy sort of normal life in a way. You can almost walk to the court as well. And this year they had to stay really far away, which is a long journey to come in and a long journey to go back each day, where you're losing some energy, of course, as well as a bubble life, which make the transportation really difficult even for the supporting team. So they have put in place some sort of bus that are running through, like shuttle bus that are running through, but otherwise a coach is not allowed to take the car unless he's with a player that he's coaching.
Yeah, very tough for them, very difficult conditions this time around. As for Ashley Barty then, who we've just seen on centre court, one of the favourites, looked very comfortable in the first set. We saw some tension in the second when she was serving for the match, and then she showed why she's the world number one in that deciding set. How did she look today, do you think, Marion?
She looked great. As you know, she picked up that first muscle injury on her leg and that this hip injury in Roland Garros. So obviously that the first thing that can be lacking is the movement. She was moving really well during that match. And of course, she had a little bit of a moment of tension at the back end of that second set where she served for the match at 5-4. Couldn't close it out there, starting to hit some few unforced errors on her forehand. And Carla Suarez-Navarro played extremely well at that moment, rushing a bit more her opponent, going more to the net, playing more aggressive, the Spanish player. And she was able to grab that second set, which was so nice for her to get. We all know her story, what she had to fight and to go through. It was amazing, I think, for her to get that set and to get a set of the world number one on the center court of Wimbledon. I think that will leave her an amazing memory. But then that third set, of course, Ashley just regrouped extremely quickly, and then she went back to what she knows the best, which is playing extremely well the points, serving well, using her slice with a lot of efficiency, and then being able to finish the point with that forehand. But I think it was a great first round for her. She was a little bit tested. I think she will get a lot of reassurance on her fitness level, that she didn't seem to be bothered by some sort of discomfort or little pain from the injury she picked up, which is always a great news when you have been aside from the courts for a few weeks. So she looks great, and a lot of seeds are showing some difficulty in this Wimbledon. So she has absolutely a shot to go far in here.
And let me just finally ask you then, Marion, we've got great champion Serena Williams in action. She turns 40 this year. She's been in the final, though, in the last 4 occasions that she's played at this tournament. Can she get there again? Can she get over the line this time around?
Well, she can absolutely, but it's a lot depending on Serena, to be honest, with, of course, all the respect you have to show to her opponents. But for her, when she's ready, and especially ready physically and fit enough to play, of course, and especially on this court, when the points are a lot shorter, when she has to play on clay or on hard court, she can absolutely put it together for 7 matches in a row and go and lift the trophy. Lately in the finals, the one she lost to Simona, the one she lost to Angie Kerber, she really showed a lot of tension and stress. It was hard for her to swing the ball. It was hard for her to play at the level we have seen her before playing, especially on that court. So I think there is, in a way, 2 different things that Serena will have to face this year at the championship. First is to get to the final, which is winning 6 matches. And she hasn't been able to do that for quite a long time. And then if she gets there, is finding a way to deal with the pressure better that she has been able to do before. And especially lately when she's really chasing that 24th Grand Slam and be able to play her level of tennis. And not coming out of the match thinking that once again she has sort of underperformed in a way in the final.
Marion, as always, great to talk to you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
That's the former Wimbledon champion Marion Bartoli with us on Sport Today. You're with the BBC World Service. Now, Carla Suarez-Navarro, who was playing in her second match since recovering from cancer, was given a standing ovation by this centre court crowd when she departed after that defeat to Ash Barty. The Spaniard says she'll retire at the end of the season. She spoke to the BBC's Jonathan Overend about her farewell appearance here at Wimbledon.
I really enjoy a lot, my last Wimbledon against Ash, the number one in the world, center court. Everything was so special, a lot of emotions. Well, I'm a little bit sad because I didn't win, but I think I give everything that I had on court, and hopefully the crowd also enjoyed the match.
Yes, everybody was on their feet. Ashley Barty was applauding. There was so much love. Carla, did that take you by surprise?
Well, a little bit, you never know how the crowd is going to react. You never know if the crowd enjoyed the match. So I was a little surprised, but at the end, I think I played a lot of of year here, and I play good tennis on court today, and well, it was so beautiful and so special, everything.
Well, wonderful to see Carlos Suarez Navarro here on centre court. We'll round up the rest of the action in this rain-disrupted second day of the championships in a moment, but we're getting close to kick-off in the final last 16 tie at Euro 2020. Sweden against Ukraine at Hampden Park in Scotland. Both teams have a chance to record their nation's first win in the knockout round of a European Championship. Let's speak to the Swedish football journalist Johanna Frandén now. Johanna, a chance for history to be made for Sweden then. They top their group ahead of Spain. How much confidence is this going to give them going into the match?
A little bit, I think. But, I mean, Sweden hasn't really done one extremely good game yet. So that remains to be seen. I think that the Swedes are cautious but quite confident and quite happy, having Ukraine rather than any of the big elephants in the first knockout stage game. So, and happy to be able to play England in a possible or potential quarterfinal, of course. That's a really, really good reason to perform well today.
Yeah, that is to come another day, isn't it? We'll have to see how this goes a little later. Just a quick one, Johanna, how do you see the game going?
I think Sweden will try and make a mark straight away, because this is a game where they will not have too much time to waste, or to run about and see how it goes. They are slight favorites, and I think they will try and be sort of master the game a little bit, but they won't go crazy for it by no means. I mean, Jan Andersson is a coach who is cautious and who likes to go a little bit harder maybe in the second half. So first half maybe a bit more reluctant than you would expect, but still Sweden will try and score. I think that's what the match game.
Johanna, thanks for joining us. Johanna Frandén there, ahead of kick-off, Sweden against Ukraine. Back here to the action at Wimbledon, and we have a winner on court one, Chris Dennis. It's Daniil Medvedev.
It is. It's the number 2 seed who's come through. A standing ovation for the Russian. In the end, pushed a little bit harder than perhaps the first 2 sets would have indicated. He needed a tie-break in the 4th set to get the job done, but he's smiling as he sits on his chair there. He's learning to love the grass a little bit more. He's through to the second round here for the 4th time, fresh from that victory in Mallorca last week. And he'll be feeling very pleased about that as we see Jan-Lennard Struff, the tall German, leaving also to great applause. He played his part as well. Struff beat Medvedev just 2 weeks ago in Halle, so that will be a great reverse victory for Medvedev, and he moves on at the bottom of the draw into round 2.
Here on centre court, Serena Williams is in some difficulty in this match with Alexander Sasnovich, and that is again because of the conditions here. She had to go off the court. She came back on. She was limping heavily. I think it's a problem with her ankle that she suffered. She's had some treatment on the court, and she received an incredible ovation from the crowd, who are really trying to get behind her. But difficult at the moment. 3 games all in this first set. Let's also hear about her sister, the 5-time champion Venus Williams, at the age of 41, playing in her 23rd Wimbledon singles draw. And she beat Mihaela Băsănescu of Romania 7-5, 4-6, 6-3. She was asked what it means winning again here at Wimbledon.
It's never easy. I played my opponent today. She played really well. Some really inspired tennis, and also playing, against a lefty is never easy. I think they're probably used to playing against righties, but we're not really used to playing against them. So, yeah, that was a challenge as well, especially first match. And so I don't remember the question, but everybody likes winning.
Well, that's Venus Williams, and her sister is in tears at the net here on centre court. She slipped again, and she has just come forward and shaken hands with Alexander Sasnovich of Belarus. She is clearly very emotional and distressed at the moment at having to retire from her first round match here at Wimbledon. We believe it was an ankle problem. She received some treatment on court. She left court, she came back, still limping, and has been suffering. And now, I'm afraid, for Serena Williams, it is all over. Chris Dennis, let me bring you in on this as well. Serena, obviously very, very upset at the moment, and it is all over for her.
Yes, that is terribly, terribly sad. I've got pictures of centre court. I'm on court 1 here, just a short distance away from you. You have to feel for her because she came into this tournament in great shape. Many people saying Wimbledon has always been her best chance of getting that, what's becoming elusive 24th Grand Slam. It just felt in the air that this might be her year. As we've been mentioning on the programme earlier, she's reached the last 4 finals here at Wimbledon, but I can see pictures, and you will be seeing this live as well, Lee, of her limping very, very badly. And that is a very, very sad way to which to depart. And we've seen 2 matches on centre court today, haven't we, Lee, which have been essentially settled by injuries.
Yeah, very emotional and very, very difficult for Serena Williams, who has now left centre court. Just before we go, Chris, just round up some of the other key results. As I mentioned, the rain has affected things today, but who's gone through?
Well, Coco Gauff, we heard from Venus Williams, and Coco Gauff, of course, who famously beat Venus at the age of 15 2 years ago. She's gone through to the second round. Angie Kerber, who was a champion here in 2018, straight sets victory for her today. And we should also mention Ons Jabeur, who became the first Arab woman to win a women's title a couple of weeks ago in Birmingham. She's also safely through to the second round today.
Yes, it's been dominated here on centre court by rather unfortunate injuries, though. Roger Federer received a walkover after his opponent Adrian Manarino slipped and injured his knee and survived a first-round scare to go through. But it is all over for Serena Williams. The 7-time champion is out after suffering an injury in the first round. That's it from Sport Today.
Sport Today is a BBC Sport production for the BBC World Service.
This is the BBC World Service with a new series looking at tiny symbols which inspire big emotions.
Emoji. Billions of these cute little characters are sent every day. It's become second nature to express our feelings with one. I'm Vivienne Nunes.
And I'm Sarah Trinor. We started out with a simple question.
How did these emoji land on our phones?
2 smiley faces. Sunday at 9 GMT. And in 30 minutes, Digital Planet with Gareth Mitchell.
There's a new technical standard in town aiming to make your smart light bulb speak to your smart switch and all your other home automation. So will it better connect the things on the Internet of Things?
That's after the documentary. This is the BBC World Service, the world's radio station.
They say it's not what you look at that matters, but what you choose to see.
I could feel with all my being that I was just hitting a complete brick wall, that nothing I said was going to go anywhere.
For the last year, we've been investigating claims of sexual and psychological abuse at the heart of one of the biggest yoga organizations in the world.
She told me, this is nothing, it happens to like all women. It always happens, it's part of yoga practice, like making you stronger and help you getting rid of your body or your ego or your mind. And she was like making fun of me.
15 women, 1 organization and countless allegations. Join me, Ishleen Kaur, as I ask who knew what and when in the 3rd and final episode of Guru here on the BBC World Service, coming up after the news.
Hello, I'm Moira Alderson with the BBC News. Tigrayan fighters in northern Ethiopia are continuing to gain ground after seizing the regional capital Mekelle on Monday. United Nations officials say the rebels have entered the town of Shire. It was earlier abandoned by Eritrean troops who've been supporting Ethiopian federal forces in the 8-month conflict. A senior American official, Robert Godek, welcomed Addis Ababa's declaration of a temporary ceasefire, but said the US would not stand by in the face of further horrors in Tigray.
We will watch closely to determine if the ceasefire results in changes on the ground. But the Ethiopian government's decision to declare a temporary end to hostilities is a promising development, and we welcome it. It is essential now that all parties commit to the ceasefire, allow humanitarian access, protect civilians, there be independent investigations into atrocities, and that there is justice for victims.
The United Nations says storms have damaged the shelters of more than 16,000 Ethiopian refugees in eastern Sudan. Heavy rains, strong winds and hailstorms destroyed tents and swept away belongings. The UN said about a quarter of the shelters had been damaged. Tens of thousands of Ethiopians are seeking refuge after fleeing the war in Tigray. It's emerged that residents at the Florida apartment block that collapsed last week were warned in April that the building was in urgent need of repair. 11 people are known to have died when the building collapsed. Another 150 remain unaccounted for. Sophie Long reports from Miami.
As more than 200 rescue workers continue their round-the-clock operation, painstakingly removing rubble in the hope of finding voids that could contain survivors, it emerged that the president of the Buildings Association explained in a letter on the 9th of April that damage detected 3 years ago had become significantly worse. Families of the victims, frustrated by the agonisingly slow process, are demanding to know how such a catastrophic collapse could have happened. They're being reassured that the rescue operation will continue.
The Netherlands has criticised Russia, accusing it of using military jets to aggressively and repeatedly harass one of its Navy frigates in the Black Sea. It said it would raise the matter with Moscow. Anna Holligan reports from The Hague.
The Dutch Defence Ministry said the armed Russian planes carried out mock attacks for hours. It described the behaviour as unsafe and entirely unjustified. The ministry said it happened on Thursday in international waters off Crimea and outside the area that Russia has considered its territorial waters since its annexation of the Ukrainian peninsula in 2014. The Dutch frigate, the Evertsen, has been involved in exercises with British naval ships in the Black Sea, including HMS Defender, that was shadowed by 20 Russian aircraft on Wednesday.
Anna Holligan reporting. World News from the BBC. The pro-independence head of Catalonia's regional government says he's pushed for a full amnesty for separatist leaders at talks with Spain's Prime Minister. Pere Aragonès repeated his view that a referendum was needed to solve the crisis over Catalan independence. That's something neither expressly permitted under Spain's current constitution nor backed by Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez. Football and in the European Championship, England have defeated Germany by 2-0 in one of the tournament's most eagerly awaited matches so far. In the second half, goals from Raheem Sterling and the team captain Harry Kane secured England's berth in the quarter-finals. Kane gave his reaction.
It's an amazing day, amazing game. To hear Wembley like this was just a moment none of us will ever forget. And great performance, obviously 2-0, another clean sheet. Yeah, just the perfect afternoon. So we'll enjoy this one, but of course we know we've got another big one on Saturday now.
Ukraine take on Sweden shortly in Glasgow to contest the remaining spot in the final 8. Scientists have discovered an ancient strain of plague bacteria in human remains dating back about 5,000 years. German researchers describe analysing the DNA recovered from the teeth and skull bones of a hunter-gatherer who had been buried at a site in what is now Latvia. Helen Briggs reports.
Dr. Ben Kraus-Kiora of the Ancient DNA Lab at Germany's University of Kiel says the 20 to 30-year-old hunter-gatherer is the oldest plague victim identified to date. The researchers think this ancient strain of plague was less contagious and not as deadly as its medieval version, challenging the theory that Stone Age populations were hit by large outbreaks of the disease. Plague is still around today, but is easily treatable with antibiotics.
That's the latest world news from the BBC.
OK, it's here. The final episode of the BBC's investigation into allegations of sexual abuse inside one of the world's biggest yoga organisations. Before we start, a warning. This episode contains graphic sexual references. I'm Aisling Kaur, and you're listening to Guru on the BBC World Service. This is episode 3, Who Knew What and When.
I reported the incident, and his response was, "Damn, not again."
She laughed at me. She told me, "This is nothing, it happens to, all women."
One of the board members said to me, "Well, he already said he's not going to do it anymore. What do you want, his blood?"
OK, So let's go back to the beginning. In episode 1, I spoke to Julie Salter, who published an account on Facebook of her abuse by Swami Vishnu. He was the founder of Shivananda Yoga, guru, pacifist, and, according to at least 3 women, a rapist.
He asked me to lie down next to him. I said, I don't understand. And in spite of everything in my body saying no, and my brain crying out no, my mind, I did.
Before he died in 1993, Vishnu created an executive members board, or the EBM, to be the caretakers of the organization after he was gone. It took some 20 years and that Facebook post before these caretakers were forced to admit publicly what Julie says they had known for years. So to help unpack how this played out, I want to take you to a sport that once occupied a very special place in my heart. Thank you. Okay, I'm here, outside the Shivananda Yoga Centre in Putney in South London. I haven't been to this place in over a year. I feel very overwhelmed with emotions, with anger, pain, anguish. So it was in this building in 2020 that 2 EBM members, they arranged a meeting. I had this faith in this organization, so I actually came to this meeting very earnestly hoping for answers, but instead I left with more questions. And it was that evening that was the end of the road for Shivananda and me, my decree absolute. I remember each and every thing those 2 EBM members said. They talked about how they knew Julie so well, and then they went on to say that they and the board and the EBM got to know about Julie's allegations in 2007. The EBM now says it was actually 2006 when they found out. But there's just one problem with that. Julie says they had known for decades that he was sexually active, and she officially reported her rape to them in 2003. Okay, here's what she says happened. Julie writes to them asking for a meeting. 2 board members agree to meet her at the Valmorin Ashram in Canada, and when she gets there, only one of the 2 turns up. Swami Mahadevananda, as it happens. The other, she's told, was busy having a massage.
I thought that I have to now confront the EBM and talk to them directly, because I really felt that if there was to be any real changes or any real healing even possible, I was misguided and naive, of course, but I knew it had to be faced into the secret life of Swami Vishnu. We were there for a while, but basically he acknowledged that he had known about it for years. And I really knew that I could feel with all my being that I was just hitting a complete brick wall, that nothing I said was going to go anywhere.
Over the next few weeks, Julie says she tells 4 more board members, either face-to-face or via long-distance phone call. She remembers it well because she was using a friend's phone and was worried about the bill. The trustees deny that Julie discussed her allegations with them in 2003. But the BBC has seen an email from Mahadev, who was a board member at the time, in which he confirms he did meet with Julie. He describes it as informal, but he says after this meeting, the allegations became open knowledge. 2005, she writes them a letter. I've got it here, and it clearly raises sexual harassment. The board deny receiving this letter. 2006, Julie attends a mediated meeting with the EBM, where discussions over some kind of financial support for her take place. The EBM claims both sides were pleased with the results at the time, but Julie disagrees and says nothing ever materialized. So, the following year, Julie's solicitor writes to the board seeking compensation and threatening a claim for damages. The EBM has their solicitor write back. Here's what they said.
It is with surprise and disappointment that we have received your letter, particularly because it contains defamatory allegations that Ms. Salter would have been sexually abused by Swami Vishnu Devananda. It is bizarre and suspicious that Ms. Salter is choosing to raise the matter 14 years after his death.
In December 2019, Julie goes public with that Facebook post. Pamela and Lucille come forward to say, "Me too." Both women told me he raped them. Both women say his abuse was an open secret. The EBM told us after this meeting with Julie, they
set up procedures and protocols to give everyone a safe space to speak out and be heard, and to evaluate any unacceptable behaviour such as sexual advances or emotional abuse.
But here's the thing. Swami Vishnu's picture still hangs proudly in ashrams around the world. His name is still chanted at sunrise and sunset. He is still venerated like a saint. We challenged them on this, and they said,
the Shivananda organisation honours its lineage and its teachings.
Next up, Swami Mahadevananda. He's the monk from episode 2 who has complaints against him from groping to public masturbation. Remember Prerna?
He stretched out his arm and grabbed my breast.
Well, she says she reported him in 2001. And she says she was laughed at and told it was just a bit of hazing.
I reported that maybe a couple of months later to Swami Durgananda in Europe.
Swami Durgananda, by the way, is a senior disciple of Vishnu. She's been on the executive board since its creation.
She laughed at me. She said, "Oh, that's so funny, you know." She told me, "This is nothing, you know, it happens to like all women. This is nothing, you know. Oof. It always happens, it's part of yoga practice, like making you stronger and getting rid of your ego or your mind." And she was like making fun of me, laughing, not taking it seriously at all.
Then there's Wendy.
He grabbed my arm and flipped the sheet back. He was masturbating, but I know that he orgasmed because there was liquid on my arm.
Wendy says she reported him in 2006.
So at the time that I was working at the Canadian ashram, so there's a very wonderful woman that was running the ashram at the time, and I went to her and reported the incident. I mean, it wasn't a surprise to her. She didn't know of it happening before. And so she said to me there was nothing she could do because she had spoken to him about it before. She wanted me to go to another person who was much more senior in the organization, Tamatan Reddy, Prahlad we used to call him. Anyway, I went to Prahlad, and his response was, "Damn, not again." He was really angry that it happened again. And so it was very obvious that the story had been told to him before by other women. More than one was my impression, which made me even more angry because he hadn't been stopped.
During this investigation, we were given a copy of a very sad letter written by a woman who was a long-time loyal member of Shivananda. In the letter, she describes how she was abused by Swami Mahadevananda, but also how she had told senior members of the EBM.
Dear EBM, it is with sadness and a heavy heart, after a long period of silence, I now feel ready to write to you. You may be aware that I've been living with a terminal health condition, which is inoperable. As for us all, it's unclear how long we have to live, and yet I've been given the gift to clean up and take care of unfinished business. I trust that it can enable each of you to sit in love, to contemplate and reflect on your own part in the long-term silencing of many types of abuse. I don't need apologies. Sadly, they're of little use. I believe that teaching yoga is a way to gain more peace, yet it's not healthy for anyone who lives in disharmony with the teachings. With love and light, for the well-being of all of us on this journey called life. Thank you.
She passed away in 2020. Mahadevananda's abuse damaged so many women, but it didn't have to be this way. This investigation has found evidence that the board knew about his sexual impropriety as early as 1999. The next voice you're going to hear is Swami Shardananda's. She is a former board member.
Well, I had heard sort of whispers and rumors But you can't do anything. You can't accuse a person because of rumors. I didn't have any proof until maybe late 98 or 99. I was a board member in charge of the UK and also Delhi. And the person who was sort of the director there, I was in London and she called me one evening and she was obviously in tears. And she said to me, Swami Mahadevananda is walking around the center without his dhoti. You know, dhoti is the lower cloth that men wear in India. So when she said it to me, it sounded like, okay, he's walking around in his underwear. A lot of people do that at home. And I wasn't really so worried about it. But I phoned him just to say, you know, you're making her uncomfortable. Can you please not do this? And he said, no, I wasn't. And she said, well, you weren't wearing a dhoti. And he said, yeah, that's true, but I wasn't wearing any underwear either. And he then proceeded to sort of graphically tell me what had happened. So I know from him directly that it was true.
What did he tell you?
Well, he told me that he hadn't worn anything below the waist and he had sort of come into the office where she was working and he had masturbated in front of her. I was obviously quite upset. And I said, you know, this isn't right. And, you know, I've heard rumors, but now I have it from your own lips that this is true. So how can we run this organization like this with a senior member doing this? So I'm going to bring it up to the board at the next meeting. So at the next executive board meeting, well, everyone knew what was going to happen. He had apparently told them. And we had to send all the secretaries out of the room and we had to turn off all recording devices. And then I said what had happened. And then they, of course, turned to him, which, I mean, of course, everyone has the right to defend themselves. And they said to him, is this true? And he said, yeah, but if she doesn't want me to do it, okay, big deal, I won't do it anymore. And then they said, okay, what's the next topic? And I said, well, wait a minute, aren't we going to deal with this? And one of the board members said to me, well, he already said he's not going to do it anymore. What do you want, his blood? I had the feeling that because of this, they were trying to get rid of me. And I think because of that, finally, because they couldn't force me to leave, they just voted me out. I just got a fax one day after I'd worked there 26 years, and it just said, given the circumstances, I had been voted off the executive board. Obviously, it's betrayal.
It would be 13 years. Yeah, 13 whole years after this meeting that Swami Mahadevananda would be asked to leave the organization. The board told us,
Swami Mahadevananda left the Shivananda organisation in 2013 at the request of the trustees following an investigation in which several women were interviewed. Those interviewed stated they did not want any sanction imposed on him.
They announced his retirement in their monthly magazine. The notice said the executive board thanked him for his devoted and inspiring service. To this day, Swami Mahadevananda receives a monthly stipend from the organization. Quick check. Till now, we have looked at the claims that the organization failed to properly deal with allegations of abuse against the founder, Swami Vishnu, and one of his direct disciples, Swami Mahadevananda. But this story gets worse. I have spoken to 5 women who say they were abused by a current and active senior teacher, the one we were unable to name for legal reasons in episode 2. The allegations against him are as recent as 2019. Here's the thing though, 2 of these women say they reported his abuse to senior members of Shivananda. So, what happened next? Well, let me bring in Carol Murchison to help us with the legals. She's part of a community group called Project Satya, meaning truth, which was set up on Facebook by Shivananda yogis who needed a safe space to talk. I actually joined the group myself after reading Julie's post to see what others were saying. The group's founders didn't trust EBM to investigate, so they crowdfunded their own, and Carol was the lawyer in charge.
Hi, Ishleen. Delighted to be here. Thank you.
I asked her what she made of the allegations.
Ishleen, I spoke, I think, to between 25 and 30 women who had allegations of sexual assault against a variety of leaders. And I found every single one of them to be credible. And they certainly portrayed a pattern of misconduct.
And in this episode, Carol, we're talking about reporting the abuse. 2 women I know, at least 2 women came forward and reported abuse at the hands of this man. And the first one is Mariam.
Yes, that's right. She absolutely recalls clearly having reported it to the director of the ashram, and that he said there was nothing that he could do about it. He was not surprised.
Okay, let's move forward to Catherine, who at the time was a minor, and she was 12 when her alleged abuse started.
Yes, that's right. What happened is that at a certain point, when the abuse escalated into groping and touching her breasts, she told her friends. One of them was the daughter of a member of the EBM, Srinivasan, and he called Catherine and he questioned her about what she was saying. He told her that it was too bad that she was upset, that she needed to learn to not hold on to her anger. And he not only did not report to her parents what was going on, but he did not report to any authorities. In any case, nothing happened as a result of that.
Catherine finally told her parents what had happened when she was in her early 20s. They were distraught.
Her parents then did a couple of things. They did go to the EBM and told them about these assaults on their daughter. In one of their accounts to me, the parents said that they were told that they had no evidence and therefore there was nothing that could be done.
Catherine's father also confronted the man himself. As a result, he wrote her a letter of apology.
I have apology in quotes here, Ishleen, because what she recalls was that in the letter he said to her, "We were young," but in fact, he was 31. The law recognizes that children cannot consent to any kind of a sexual encounter like this. The law also recognizes that those of us who are in a position to know about situations like this have a duty to report it so that it can be addressed. Certainly, I would assume that people who are running a children's camp have an absolute duty to report a situation like this brought to their attention.
The EBM says now that they have been informed in writing of the allegations against this man, they have removed him from the board and teaching whilst they investigate. But we have been told by several sources he is still very much involved in India. I called the Kerala ashram myself and was told he did in fact teach a full course earlier this year. We did offer the EBM the opportunity to be interviewed for this program. They declined, but sent us this statement.
The Board of Trustees fully sympathises with those who came forward and offers any individual who feels that they might have been affected by the conduct referred to in the programme its assurance that it will not tolerate abuse or disregard inappropriate behaviour. It apologises unreservedly for any historic mistakes which it made in addressing the allegations. As a result of those allegations, Shivananda has established a confidential reporting facility, commissioned an independent investigation, and has appointed legal experts who have helped to review and implement safeguarding policies and put in place appropriate training.
So I've seen 4 of the victim reports from their independent investigation into this teacher we cannot name, all of which conclude that on the balance of probability, the survivors are credible and their testimonies are truthful including allegations that 2 of them reported their abuse to the EBM. So I want to end this series where this all began, the Shivananda Yoga Center in Patni. And once upon a time, coming here to me felt like coming home. And it's really emotional when I say this. Today I'm standing here a few meters away, and I feel like a complete stranger to this place. But there's still something that troubles me. During our investigation, the women that I spoke to, the women who came forward, they were all Westerners. And that doesn't mean that no Indian women were affected. It's harder for Indian women because we're up against this cultural barrier. And then in India, patriarchy's grip on society is still very tight. My hope is that after listening to our series, if there are any women who feel that they've not been heard, they at least know that they're not alone. For me and Shivananda, though, there's no coming back. Let's go. At the time of recording Guru, Kuttannayar or Swami Vishnu is still worshipped at ashrams across the globe. Morajjo Finocchi or Swami Mahadevananda still lives comfortably and with impunity. We are told that the teacher we can't name is still actively involved in the organization in India. Guru is co-produced and co-written by me, Ishleen Kaur, and World Service Investigations producer Louise Adamo. Our editor is Hugh Levinson. Special thanks to all the women who trusted us with their stories.
You're listening to the BBC World Service, where Razia Iqbal discusses the future of public healthcare.
I'll be joined by Dr. Paul Farmer, the renowned physician, anthropologist and writer, to answer questions from people about healthcare where they live or work.
In your experience of other countries, have you seen such an approach work well, and what can we learn from it?
If you look at outliers like Rwanda, those are the countries that invest the largest fraction of their public treasury in healthcare and education.
We'll be discussing the pandemic, of course, but also the rise in mental health problems, how to tackle malaria, TB, and how we care for our elderly.
What would be the framework that would protect anyone when they were critically ill or injured? And you just can't find a framework that's more expansive than the idea of healthcare as a human right, and maybe even health as a human right.
A Right to Health at bbcworldservice.com/documentaries.
I'm Gareth Mitchell with Technology this half hour here on the BBC World Service. Today, why did YouTube take down videos highlighting the plight of Muslims in the so-called re-education camps of China's Xinjiang province? And then why were the videos reinstated a few days later? We'll discuss that. Also in the programme, better connecting the things on the Internet of Things. There's a new technical standard to help all the smart devices in your home talk to each other. And much more on the programme. That's Digital Planet after the news.
BBC News with Moira Alderson. Tigrayan fighters in northern Ethiopia are continuing to gain ground after seizing the regional capital Mekelle on Monday. United Nations officials say the rebels have entered the town of Shire. It was earlier abandoned by Eritrean troops who've been supporting Ethiopian federal forces in the 8-month conflict. A senior US official welcomed Addis Ababa's declaration of a temporary ceasefire. The United Nations says storms have damaged the shelters of more than 16,000 Ethiopian refugees in eastern Sudan. Heavy rains, strong winds and hailstorms have destroyed tents and swept away belongings. It's emerged that residents at the Florida apartment block, which collapsed last week, were warned that the building needed urgent repairs. In a letter on the 9th of April, the president of the building's Residents Association explained that damage detected during an inspection in 2018 had become significantly worse. Scientists have discovered a strain of plague bacteria in human remains buried about 5,000 years ago in Latvia. Researchers found it was probably not as lethal as the version which became known as the Black Death. Nigeria's Justice Minister says a prominent separatist leader has been arrested and brought before the High Court in Abuja. Nnamdi Kanu has been on the run for more than 2 years. The pro-independence head of Catalonia's regional government says he's pushed for a full amnesty for separatist leaders at talks with Spain's Prime Minister. Pere Aragonès repeated his view that a referendum was needed. Football, and in the European Championship, England have defeated Germany by 2-0 to book a place in the quarter-finals. Raheem Sterling and Harry Kane scored to the delight of the home fans in Wembley. Their next match will be against Ukraine or Sweden, who are facing off now in Glasgow. That's the latest BBC News.
Hello, I'm Gareth Mitchell. Welcome along to Digital Planet. Today, first the videos were taken down and then promptly put back up again. We're hearing how YouTube apparently changed its mind about videos highlighting the plight of Muslims in China's Xinjiang province. Also today, a new technical standard to better connect everything on the Internet of Things. And Sonic the Hedgehog has just turned 30. So as you can tell, Bill Thompson and I, studio expert, are in celebratory, jubilant mood today.
I know, 30 years. So young, so young.
No, oh, to be 30 again. But first, now how YouTube's community guidelines are being weaponised to suppress dissent against China's treatment of Muslims detained in the so-called re-education camps of Xinjiang province.
Hello, Kazakh land. I am a Kazakh national. My relative Apka Alpibeyli is a native of Kulja district, Auli village. He was captured on the 29th of March 2018 and sentenced to 17 years in prison. He is now in new prison number 1 in Kunes. I am seeking help from the Kazakh Interior Minister, Foreign Minister, and international human rights bodies. 26th of February 2021.
Well, in this video, a Kazakh woman tells of the plight of a family member in detention. She holds up a copy to the camera of the man's ID to prove that he is a real person. But for a while last week, YouTube took down many such videos, saying that revealing people's ID on camera violated its rules. But last week, after some media attention, the videos were reinstated. The channel at the centre of it all is called Atatürk. It's a Kazakh human rights channel. And it seems that pro-China actors have coordinated attempts to flag videos of dissent like those of Atatürk, citing copyright and other violations, effectively to cajole YouTube into taking the films down. Well, we're joined by Eileen Guo of the MIT Technology Review. And Eileen, you've been reporting this story. Welcome to Digital Planet. And I wonder if you can just sort of sum up for us what has been going on here, or what appears to be going on with YouTube, first of all, having these videos up and then taking them down again. Or taking the videos down and then bringing them back up again. What has been going on?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. So the issue started this time around on June 15th when Atatürk Kazakh Human Rights, the channel, received a notification that its channel had been permanently removed for violating community guidelines. So if you went onto the channel's main site on YouTube, you would just see this, this notification in bright red text that the channel was no longer there. And YouTube didn't really give that much explanation for what was happening to the channel or publicly. And when we started asking some questions, we learned that it was because YouTube had taken issue with what they called personally identifiable information, which was referring to the ID cards that family members of the victims were holding up to prove that they were who they said they were.
Right, okay. And YouTube was saying really that these videos, by holding up, and this seemed to be the contentious part as far as YouTube was concerned, that these IDs were being held up against the camera. And so this would violate, for instance, criminal organisations policy. I think another response that YouTube gave when challenged about this was that this could be about its anti-bullying guidelines and so on. So YouTube says it had its reasons originally for taking these videos down.
Yeah, that's right. YouTube does have a lot of different community guidelines, and so the issue with the personally identifiable information, according to YouTube, was that it violated their policies on cyber harassment and doxing. And once questions started being asked, not only by ourselves, but by organizations like Human Rights Watch and Reuters, they admitted that this was not a case where personally identifiable information was being posted with the intent of doxing someone. These are people that are already in camps or family members that are trying to prove that, this isn't a false accusation, that this is real.
Yes, yeah. So it's to raise, I suppose, attention to the plight of these detained people. And I suppose I should say YouTube, amongst all this, has released various statements, but one that I see here is that they say we have strict policies that prohibit harassment on YouTube, including doxing, but we welcome responsible efforts to document important human rights cases around the world. We also have policies that do not allow channels to publish personally identifiable information in order to prevent harassment. And maybe to be fair to YouTube, when they're posting up, millions of videos are going up every single day, how they're able to tell the difference between ID being waved in front of a camera as part of a campaign to raise awareness of detained people versus the same thing going on in another video when it's aimed at doxing somebody or violating YouTube's guidelines. You can see the bind that they're in.
Well, I'm glad that you brought up that statement because it stood out to me for a number of reasons. But backing up a little bit, one of the things that's been really interesting watching all of this play out is that the videos that were removed and that purportedly, violated these guidelines, they've been up since 2018. So there's also a question of why have they been the subject of attention now? And what Attajert believes, as they told me, is that this is the result of a coordinated effort to mass report and mass flag the videos. And I've spoken to disinformation experts that have spoken about how this is increasingly a tactic that state-affiliated actors will use. So I think that's something at play that YouTube hasn't really dealt with or made room for, at least publicly. How are they going to treat, channels in other types of governments where there are different laws, where and often the laws are oppressive. The other thing that was really interesting about their statement is when they say that they welcome responsible efforts to document human rights abuses, who exactly are they talking to determine what counts as responsible or not? And it seems like in this case, they didn't really speak to anyone proactively, and they responded when Human Rights Watch reached out to them, or when we reached out to ask questions.
Right. Okay. So, Bill Thompson, what do you make of all this?
I think that point that Eileen's just made about who did YouTube consult about what is responsible goes to the very heart of this, which is we have very large organisations, very large, for-profit organisations who have become a major channel for all sorts of people to share testimony about issues that really matter to them, trying to influence public opinion, trying to redress wrongs. And these channels are setting their own policies. They're doing it for themselves. There's no real regulation there. They have community standards, and they don't really speak to who the community is. They're not responsive in any way. And that creates enormous risk for those who are trying to use those channels, because as we've seen, the message can be taken down for what look like arbitrary reasons, or, as we've heard, other organisations, other individuals can try to use those policies to limit the reach of your speech. And it speaks to me of the fact that we don't really have a public square. What we have are lots of private channels, and they have all these issues, and we don't at the moment have a proper debate about how we might resolve this.
Yeah, and what action has Attajert taken now? Because I know that they've gone beyond YouTube, for instance. There are obviously various other video hosting websites, one of which Attajert has now gone to.
Yeah, so Attajert is, they've moved some of their videos, a little bit less than 1,000 at this point, to a smaller site called Odyssey. Even before all of this happened, they did have hard drive backups of videos. And they've also been talking to YouTube about how they might be able to bring some of the videos that were made private, because they do have this personally identifiable information. They've been talking to YouTube and considering whether or not to blur out that information. But this changes this long-standing model of how they document human rights abuses. And so it kind of puts them in this really uncomfortable position where, on the one hand, the reason that they had that identifiable information was to counter any, potential propaganda or accusations by the Chinese government or actors affiliated with the Chinese government that they might be making up cases or making up people. And so, these ID cards were a way to fight against that. But now, on the other hand, if they're going to be forced to take this identification information off of YouTube for it to stay on YouTube, they're really caught between two really powerful forces for different reasons, but which may have the ultimate same end result of just censoring them.
It's interesting because we're seeing this conflict with YouTube as the channel. Of course, 15, 20, 30 years ago, campaigners would have had to persuade a journalist and then an editor and then a television station or a radio station or a newspaper to publish their story and defend the story, and that was incredibly difficult. So you've got this thing where it's now a lot easier to get out there, but the rules are very different. And we find those rules are not liberating or as liberating as you might, because we need to deal with all of these conflicts. And it feels to me like we're at the very early stages of finding a way to define how we engage with these big platforms in a way that allows them to be socially responsible and to meet the needs that people have without giving them too much power over what we can say online.
And just finally and briefly to you, Eileen, I'm looking at the site now. It is up as we go to air on this programme, that the site, YouTube still has the site up. Do you think it will remain up now? I guess you're speculating here, but what's your gut feeling? What's going to happen?
That's a good question. It's and it is speculation, but I think that now that there is attention on the site, YouTube is going to perhaps act differently. Even after we reported on this story, they had 12 additional videos that were made private because they supposedly violated the policy against violent and criminal organizations. But what was interesting in the documentation that Atterjurt received this time is that it wasn't going to count towards their three strike policy, in which YouTube will remove a channel if there are more than 3 strikes or violations within 90 days. And so that suggests to me that YouTube is now treating this case a little bit differently than it might otherwise.
There, we'll leave it. Eileen Guer, thank you so much for joining us on the programme. Well, now, a better way of connecting the things on the Internet of Things. The smart home may be increasingly smart, but it isn't necessarily fully connected, because the wireless-enabled light bulb you bought from one manufacturer doesn't necessarily talk to the smart switch from elsewhere. So, in the last few weeks, a new connectivity standard has just landed called Matter. Well, actually, it's just the name that's new. In the old days, i.e. until earlier this month, it was called the Zigbee Alliance. So to assess how much better connected the connected home will now become, I've been speaking to tech journalist and presenter of the Internet of Things podcast, Stacey Higginbottom.
I've been covering the Internet of Things and filling my home with smart gadgets for the last 10 years. As part of that, I field a ton of questions and spend my own time trying to ask myself, hey, will these light bulbs talk to this light switch? And a lot of the time, the answer is no. And for most people, the idea of having to Google 20 or 30 websites just to figure out if something's going to work in your home is just a non-starter. And sometimes manufacturers will tell you that something is going to work with a particular ecosystem, and then it doesn't, and then you're stuck. So this was a huge problem. It makes people angry, it makes them not want to buy this stuff, and it makes them tell their friends that they should never, ever, ever, ever invest in the smart home.
I think that really sums it up so well. But I suppose we've already had Project Appropriately Chip, so you can tell me what that stands for and how it's been the beginning of trying to unify all these different devices.
So back in December 2019, Apple, Google, Amazon, and Samsung all got together and said, hey, we are not selling enough products. They may not have actually said that, but I think they did. So they said that, and they said, hey, we're going to get together and create a standard so your light switches will work with any light bulb that works on the standard. And the standard was called Project Connected Home over IP, Project CHIP for short. And the whole idea, again, was to make this easy on people.
I suppose what we're leading up to is that it's all been a bit of a mess, really.
Just a huge mess. I mean, there are always proprietary standards in the smart home, so you've got all these like fancy, expensive systems that work on their own radios. Then you've got Zigbee, you've got Z-Wave, you've got Wi-Fi, you've got Bluetooth. Back in 2014, the Google Nest folks invented something called Thread, and all of this stuff was converging in the smart home, and normal people were like, what? No.
So tell me about Matter then.
Project CHIP became Matter. So Matter is Project CHIP, if you've ever heard about that. And if not, don't worry about it. You'll only need to pay attention to it as Matter. And the idea here is that when you have a smart home, you're imbuing these objects with some sort of extra skills. So you might have a light bulb, and historically your light bulb turned on and off. If you add a computer to it and a radio, your light bulb can turn on and off, or it can dim, or maybe it changes colors, and it has to communicate with something else to do that. Historically, that has all been proprietary, right? So one light bulb might tell somebody it changes blue one way, and another light bulb might tell a switch it changes blue a different way. And that was just terrible. Developers had to build for everybody's different ecosystems and light bulbs. And so Matter really just says, hey, every single light bulb is going to speak the same language. Every single switch is going to understand those light bulbs. And door locks and blinds and televisions, they're all going to have these profiles that make it easy for anyone to communicate with them and tell them what to do.
And of course, Matter uses pretty much all the different wireless standards like Ethernet, which isn't wireless, sorry, but Wi-Fi, Thread, Bluetooth. So wired or wireless, it's carried across all of those then?
Well, sort of. So I know. The devil is always in the details.
Oh, and there's me thinking it was all so straight. I thought we'd sorted the Internet of Things. Maybe not.
Yeah. So what's going to happen is it does speak over Ethernet. It does speak over Wi-Fi for high data rate type stuff and things that are plugged in. And then it's going to use Thread for any of the low data rate or sensors or battery powered devices. Bluetooth actually kind of got cut out of the Matter standard. Technically, you can run the Matter protocol over Bluetooth, but nobody wants to do that.
So we've got the big guns there on board, Apple, Amazon, Google, I read here, Samsung, Huawei, but that's not all manufacturers.
So there are a few companies that aren't participating. A lot of them are waiting to see like how their particular gear is handled, or they're waiting to see if Apple or Google is going to, take over their business and all of their value proposition.
Right, so there's a certain amount of brinkmanship. But there's already Home Assistant. Many people will be aware of it. Home automation platform. It's open source. It's privacy protecting. It works across all different platforms and so on. So doesn't Matter kind of already exist with Home Assistant?
I have used Home Assistant and I love it. But I am also a person who spends like 2 to 3 hours a week on my smart home. And most people are not going to be those people. Home Assistant requires you to understand that you need a Zigbee dongle. It requires you a Z-Wave dongle. It requires you to have drivers. I mean, these are not things that most people want to contend with. Actually, I talked to Paulus, who is the creator of Home Assistant, and he is excited about what's happening here and plans to support it as Matter gets rolled out to people.
But what about people who've just shelled out on a whole load of existing IoT smart home devices? Will they work? Do we have backwards compatibility here?
Theoretically. If you've shelled out on Philips Hue devices, go you. You spent a lot of money on cool light bulbs and they will be backwards compatible. Like Philips also owns a cheaper brand of connected light bulb and switches called the Whiz brand. Those will only be compatible going forward. So it really depends on the manufacturer if they want to support it. It also depends on if they built their stuff to be upgraded. If you have things that are Zigbee compatible, Wi-Fi, or they have Thread in there, it's possible they could be backwards compatible.
So with a bit of a wait and see on that then. But the idea is then that products will be getting onto the marketplace. They'll have some badge on, won't they? They've got this Matter logo. So these will be Matter certified devices, and you will know that that switch will talk to that light bulb.
You won't actually be able to buy these devices until the end of this year, and then we'll start to see manufacturers push out more Matter compliant stuff at the beginning of next year.
And so as you yourself, Stacey, as somebody who's been across this for at least the last 10 years, do you think when the history of the Internet of Things is written, people will look back on this day, this moment, and say, this is when they sorted it all out? Or will there just be a whole load of problems with functionality and goodness knows what? How significant is this?
I think this is one of the two most exciting IoT stories or smart home stories this year. I do think when you look back at this, like next year at this time, you're going to be like, oh, they didn't put cameras in the spec. They didn't put appliances in the spec. So it's not going to solve everything all at once, but it's getting us there.
Oh, well, that's some good news, isn't it? That's Stacey Higginbottom talking to me earlier. So, Bill Thompson, are you quite matter of fact about this then?
Oh, very good.
Thank
you. Yes. It's really interesting and it's good to see. There is always the danger. There's a well-known technology comic called XKCD, and they have one called Standards. It says, situation, there are 14 competing standards. Everyone says, that's ridiculous. We need to develop one universal standard that covers everyone else's. Situation, tomorrow, there are 15 competing standards. That's obviously what they're trying to avoid here. I'm old enough to remember in 1999 the first Bluetooth headsets coming out and how Bluetooth was going to fix all of the problems about sort of short-range devices and stuff like that, and that hasn't worked out. We heard that Bluetooth isn't properly part of the Matter standard. It's been sort of what they call deprecated, not going to be properly used. So there's a lot to worry about in terms of the history, but there's also a lot to be optimistic about because you've got some big players. The big change is, 22 years ago, trying to run Bluetooth, you had very limited processing power and not very powerful batteries. So doing anything interesting took a lot of processing, took a lot of time, and used up your battery. We now have incredibly powerful processors in these devices and very good batteries. So there's a lot more we can do. We can solve a lot more problems.
Yeah, so the Internet of Things, it's just getting even more exciting. Did you feel that way?
I don't feel an excitement about this. I do feel an inevitability about this. It's like we're not going to be allowed to get away without connecting everything to the network via IP. It's just going to be the world. It will still sometimes be still frustrating and complex. Matter could simplify things, and therefore I welcome it if they can pull it off.
All right, Bill, thank you. Well, finally, happy birthday, Sonic the Hedgehog, 30 years young this week. Now, not only has Super Sonic been a big commercial success, but he's also really got quite a technology story to tell. Our gaming reporter, Chris Barrow, has more, including the answers to questions like, why is Sonic blue and why are his shoes red? But first, we go back to where it all started.
The year is 1991. Mario and Nintendo are kings of the gaming world.
It's me, Mario!
Sega's console, the Sega Genesis, also known as the Sega Mega Drive, has been out for a few years, and they're lagging behind. What they need is a flagship series to compete with the Italian plumber. Enter the fray, Sonic the Hedgehog. On June the 23rd, 1991, Sega released the first ever Sonic the Hedgehog game, and he was so popular that he became Sega's mascot, and to this day is their biggest selling franchise. Estimates put the lifetime revenue of Sonic across all media at $10 billion. Now he's blue because Sega wanted him to be the same colour as their logo, Sega! And his red shoes were inspired by Michael Jackson's shoes from the Bad album, and also Santa Claus's contrasting red and white look.
Wow! Mommy's kissing Santa Claus!
Yuji Naka created Sonic, and in 2010 talked about how he came up with the character.
Well, the original idea for Sonic came from a test program I made. One day I thought about a new character who doesn't get blocked or stopped by enemies. I came up with the idea of a character, a rabbit, who moves forwards and tackles enemies and keeps running. He doesn't stop. And this character later became Sonic the Hedgehog.
So there you have it, he was originally supposed to be a rabbit. Lots of other designs for Sonic were tested as well. In fact, he used to have a human girlfriend called Madonna, but that idea didn't last long. And the reason Sonic can't swim in the games is because Yuji Naka thought hedgehogs couldn't swim, except that they can. Nintendo's console at the time, the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, or SNES, was technically better than the Mega Drive in almost every way. But the one thing Sega's console had more of was processing power. It was twice as fast. That meant it could make games that ran very quickly, like Sonic the Hedgehog, and these games made their rival's console look sluggish. And what an impact Sonic had on the games industry. Sega were lagging behind Nintendo in terms of sales, but because Sonic was so popular, they went on to take a 65% share of the market. But it hasn't all been rivalry. One of the most popular games in recent years is Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games Tokyo 2020.
Mario and Sonic and team are back in the biggest sports party of the year. Packed with more action than ever. Prepare to party.
The brand of Sonic has also grown over the years. You may have seen the film called inspirationally Sonic the Hedgehog, which was released last year.
I'm Sonic, a little ball of super energy in an extremely handsome package. On my planet, people were always after my powers, so I came to yours.
There was even a 30th anniversary Sonic Symphony, performed by the Sonic Symphony Orchestra on his 30th birthday. We have to mention the iconic music. It's been a huge part of the Sonic games. Who remembers the Emerald Hill theme tune? Whether it's the technological innovation, the music, or the speed of the games, there's no doubting that Sonic has had a huge impact on the video game industry. Here's to the next 30 years at least, before it's game over.
Yep, Sonic not quite over the Emerald Hill yet. That was Chris Barrow reporting.
And it was lovely to hear that, and lovely to hear the music, and to feel nostalgic for the game. I think what it shows, the fact we're talking about this, just shows how much gaming is now part of popular culture, indeed just of culture. That any of those arguments that somehow it's separate from, there's the gamers over there and then the cultured people over there, those have just gone out of the window. That we commemorate the 30th anniversary of a game in the same way as we commemorate the 30th anniversary of a ballet or any work of art like that.
With a symphony as well.
Indeed, they are works of art. And Mario, Sonic, Zelda, Spyro, Animal Crossing in years to come. We're going to see these as the important cultural innovations they were, and want to remember them and think about them within the context of our broader cultural development. There are people, anybody who's 30 has grown up with Mario, Sonic part of their lives. Of course, they want that to be something that is remembered and properly commemorated.
All right, Bill, would you look at the time? We have to leave it. The studio manager is Giles Aspin, the producer is Anja Liturovic, and we'll have more next week. See you then, folks. Bye-bye.
This is the BBC World Service, and for the next World Book Club, Harriet Gilbert is talking to author Jane Harper about her novel The Dry.
Right from the start, I knew I wanted to have kind of two mysteries for the reader to solve.
It's a chilling story set under a sweltering sun.
The question, I guess, for the reader and for the characters is, to what degree, if any, those two events have intertwined.
World Book Club, Saturday at 11 GMT. And in 60 minutes, People Fixing the World,
where we're heading to one of America's deeply troubled, gang-ridden communities to look at a bold approach to crime prevention. Ex-criminals are employed to run part of the probation system themselves, and it seems to be working. Reconviction rates are dropping.
This is the BBC World Service, the world's radio station.
Welcome to NewsHour. It's live from the BBC World Service in London. I'm Tim Franks. Tigrayan rebels celebrate retaking their regional capital, but aid agencies in Ethiopia warn the situation is still perilous.
5.5 million people were on the brink of famine. 350,000 people were already facing famine-like conditions. So we know that the situation is dire and has been so for quite a while.
Also, South Africa's Supreme Court loses patience with the former president, Jacob Zuma.
To allegations of state capture, corruption and fraud in the public sector, including organs of state, Mr. Jacob Zuma is sentenced to undergo 15 months imprisonment.
How China is stifling dissent way beyond its borders, what it is to sell tourist trinkets in Gaza, and caring for your falsetto at the age of 87. First, the news.
Hello, I'm Moira Alderson with the BBC News. Tigrayan fighters in northern Ethiopia are continuing to gain ground after seizing the regional capital Mekelle on Monday. United Nations officials say the rebels have entered the town of Shire. It was earlier abandoned by Eritrean troops who've been supporting Ethiopian federal forces in the 8-month conflict. A senior American official, Robert Godek, welcomed Addis Abeba's declaration of a temporary ceasefire, but said the US was watching closely.
If the government's announcement of a cessation of hostilities does not result in improvements and the situation continues to worsen, Ethiopia and Eritrea should anticipate further actions. We will not stand by in the face of horrors in Tigray.
The United Nations says storms have damaged the shelters of more than 16,000 Ethiopian refugees in eastern Sudan. Tens of thousands have fled the war in Tigray. Heavy rains, strong winds and hailstorms have destroyed tents and swept away belongings. The director of the Africa region for the ICRC, Patrick Youssef, told the BBC that aid agencies must swiftly take advantage of any ceasefire.
The situation is alarming, and that's why we need to continue pushing for humanitarian access, for delivery of food and essential items for us to prevent the worst, because the catastrophe is looming. The situation is extremely worrying, but we do need today to act and act quickly.
It's emerged that residents at the Florida apartment block that collapsed last week were warned in April the building was in urgent need of repair. In a letter in April, the president of the building's Residents Association explained that damage detected during an inspection in 2018 had become significantly worse. The association asked residents to pay for extensive repair work. The Netherlands has criticised Russia, accusing it of using military jets to aggressively and repeatedly harass one of its navy frigates in the Black Sea. The Dutch Defence Ministry said the armed Russian planes feigned attacks for hours, describing the behaviour as unsafe and totally unjustified. Football and in the European Championship, England have defeated Germany by 2-0 to book a place in the quarter-finals. It's the first time in 55 years that England have beaten Germany in a major knockout football match. The BBC's John Watson was at Wembley.
So much history has sort of shaped this fixture between England and Germany in the past, and historically it is a match that England have not fared well in. 4 times England have faced Germany in a knockout match at a major tournament since England won the World Cup back in 1966, and they have lost every single one of them. Disappointment, of course, for Germany and their manager Jogi Löw, who leaves his job now at the end of this tournament after 15 years in charge. He did, of course, win the World Cup, but time now for these England fans to celebrate.
England's next match will be against Ukraine or Sweden, who are now playing in Glasgow. World News from the BBC. The pro-independence head of Catalonia's regional government says he's pushed for a full amnesty for separatist leaders at talks with Spain's Prime Minister. Pere Aragonès repeated his view that a referendum was needed to solve the crisis over Catalan independence. That's something neither expressly permitted under Spain's current constitution nor backed by Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez. Nigeria's Justice Minister says a prominent separatist leader has been arrested and brought before the High Court in Abuja. The head of the indigenous people of Biafra group, Nnamdi Kanu, has been on the run since an arrest warrant was issued more than 2 years ago. Mr. Kanu is accused of treason, terrorism and the unlawful possession of firearms. Scientists have discovered an ancient strain of plague bacteria in human remains dating back about 5,000 years. German researchers analysed the DNA recovered from the teeth and skull bones of a hunter